Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Talking Landscape Photography. It's very, very nice to have you with us tonight. It's nice to be back. Sorry about last fortnight ago. Things got a bit busier than we would have liked, and so it was a bit hard to string a show together. I think it's getting to the pointy end of the year at the moment, and so it's getting a lot harder to balance priorities and commitments. And this show is definitely an important part of that, but unfortunately, we weren't able to put something together in time. But we are tonight, and we're very pleased to be here. I've got the illustrious Paul Hoelen here with me. Welcome, welcome, Paul.
Yeah, evening, brother. Yeah, nice to be back on board. I think Ben was away in New Zealand for the last one as well, actually, and he might have just gotten back. So apologies on Ben's behalf. I'm not sure if he's even back yet. He might still be traveling back, or pretty close to it. So he's had a epic journey over there, which I won't lie, I'll be a little bit jealous of. I saw some beautiful snow and Fiordland where he's hanging out with Wilpatino, and I think they got some beautiful light and some really good conditions. So sometime or other soon we'll give Ben the old twist of the arm to give us a good show on that one. Been a little quiet on my end. I'm sort of planning a trip to Fiji next week. Actually, sort of what I'm working on at the moment. Shooting a big wedding over there and doing a bit of exploratory sort of work and hopefully a little bit of aerial stuff. We'll see. But how about you, Lukey?
Oh, look, I've been here, there, and everywhere, I suppose, and it has. I ran a lot of events through a sort of we had a program on Sony Scene, which is an online platform where we have a whole bunch of events and different things happening. And I was fortunate to run some events for Sony over a period of weeks. And so they had this event called the Scene Fest, which was for I think it was pretty much for all of September and October. I think it maybe started on September the 9th. And it was very exciting because everyone that attended went into the draw for an international holiday, which is pretty awesome. And I managed to run, I don't know, I think it must have been close to 10 online sessions and some in-person events as well. So kept things very busy and had a corporate shoot in between all of that as well. And so, yeah, definitely more than enough going on. And also, of course, ran a whole bunch of astrophotography workshops chasing nightscapes and auroras, and managed to get the aurora on a couple of occasions, but it was a bit the auroras backed off a lot more than I think a lot of people would have liked, so that was a bit disappointing. But we still got some incredible conditions and covered pretty much the whole state, actually. Went up to Table Cape, across to Low Head, which is north of Launceston, managed to fit in St Helens and also Freycinet, as well as Tasman Peninsula, all in within that time. So beautiful coverage of the state, and it was amazing that we were trying to pick the best weather across the state where we went for those events, and it just so happened that each time it was somewhere a little bit different, so we're able to do some different things and see some pretty awesome sights, actually. So yeah, can't complain too much. And you've I don't know if you wanted to talk about your other escapades, Paul, but yes, you've
No, that's
definitely
fine. That's
been
fine,
put
mate.
through the ringer.
Yeah, I've had an interesting time, but yeah, I'll leave that to another storytelling episode around a fire sometime. But
Fair enough, fair enough.
no, I'm doing well and looking forward to the summer actually. So I'm just planning on heading off to New Zealand as well, hopefully. And Luke and I had a bit of a chat about upcoming shows for the future, which was a really good session. And there's some pretty wonderful photographers I've been connecting with. It's kind of amazing. Luke and I keep surprising ourselves, like, oh, geez, we've done this for 3.5 years or something, and there's still so much more. And because our list is still so long
Oh
for
yeah,
the potential of things
there's
we can
more than
do.
enough. There's so many interesting people, interesting places, interesting topics. Obviously, it's a job for life doing this, and so it's just a matter of keeping up the I guess the passion and also the allocating the right time to make it all happen too. It doesn't all happen automatically. There is a fair bit of planning in the background, and yeah, we really value everyone that tunes in and has a chance to interact with us and yeah, hear what all the amazing presenters that we're bringing to you guys. So also pumped about the session tonight. I absolutely love talking about equipment and gear. And I know Paul's probably not quite as much of a gear nerd as I am, but it's kind of great because I shoot Sony, Paul shoots Canon. Unfortunately, Ben can't be here tonight. He's Nikon, so it would have been amazing to have Ben's insights on the Nikon system. But that's okay. We'll try and cover a bit of that off, but we have to admit I haven't really been looking too much what's been happening in the Nikon camp. So, of course, there's a few other platforms as well out there.
So, look, I sort of suggested in our own minds that tonight might be as good an episode as any we've had in a long time to get some audience feedback and get some audience questions. So we're going to try and make a bit of a point of it to keep an eye on what comes up for people, because, as you know, I've been shooting for 30 years or probably longer, but and I've used a lot of different sort of genres and styles of equipment all the way back from film days, but it's still quite individualistic where you end up sort of leaning in towards. And so no single person sort of has the ultimate sort of breadth on every single system that's out there. But the closest person I know to that is Mr. Luke Tscharke here, because he's across the board on if I've ever got an equipment question or I'm looking at buying something, I'm going straight to Luke. He's a bit of a master, and I've made some very, very clever and smart decisions that have really helped facilitate quite a few parts of my photography after conversations with Luke over the last few years. So we're kind of lucky to have him tonight, and you know, his IP is really valuable in that regard, and in some ways, well, in a lot of ways, actually, you're really lucky that Luke's willing to put that out there tonight to some extent, because
Well, I guess that's it. I mean, I have spent way too many hours probably procrastinating, or at least getting stuck in a hyperfocus loop on different gear equipment, and I buy a lot of things too just to try them out. So I'm keen to chat to you about what I've found. I guess the main thing that we wanted to say is we'll talk about quite a bit of different equipment here. And the key thing is that we're just talking about what works for us. And so it's really important to note that, you might have something different. It doesn't mean you have to go down to the shop tomorrow and pick out something because I'm using it, but hopefully it might give you some thought processes around pieces of equipment that maybe aren't doing the job for you, and give you some ideas of what to get as an upgrade next time, or even if you're getting into it, a nice path to go with. And obviously too, we're working professionals, so that also means that we're going to be kind of recommending things on the higher end of things, or at least I guess I'd like to think we're not even recommending, we're just talking about what we end up using at the end of the day. So obviously that's,
think about it, look, it's kind of like we kind of require a level of robustness because we're using the equipment so much more regularly and often in quite extreme conditions. Not that other people don't, but it's that consistency of use that I think sort of makes you realize in the long term it's a more worthwhile investment to get better equipment or higher end. So it's not necessary for the actual results sometimes, for the images that you need and the outcomes, specifically the size outcomes you're looking for. Like, you don't need a 60 or 100 megapixel camera if you're not going to print 2 meters wide. It's completely unnecessary. So it's
a very good point.
Yeah, and there's that old joking statement, all the gear and no idea. Like, you can have the best gear in the world and be taking crap photographs. Like, it's a great photograph comes from here, it comes from here, it comes from connection with place, it comes from understanding of light, it comes from timing, it comes from a relationship with the landscape or a place or a person or event that shows a lot of connection and knowledge on your own part that's built up over time. A great camera can't show you how to do a good composition. So it's kind of like, it doesn't tell you when to press the shutter. So just the proviso before we get into the whole gear thing is there's a whole bunch of elements that have nothing to do with the gear you have that make a great photograph, and a memorable one and a powerful one. But at the same time, there are certain advances technologically that can be really useful, that can speed up your workflow, that can enable things to happen a lot easier than it can before, that can help you avoid mistakes in the field, that can give you a feedback loop and immediacy that we never used to have access to, particularly in the film days. And particularly, I think low light photography, focus stacking, and a few other things have really gone through the roof in the last few years, and that shift to mirrorless in particular is kind of the current trending shift that's probably had the most significant influence on the kind of outcome of our work. And Luke and I talked quite a bit about the show tonight because we did one a couple of years ago. So long ago, we couldn't even remember if we'd done one on gear.
Yeah, no, we had to look it up. Well, it was show number 31, so it was, that's almost 100 shows.
Yeah.
Well, not there's quite a few shows ago.
So the point being, what we thought would be interesting is to actually reflect on what is actually we're still using consistently over that time frame that hasn't developed, that is still going to stand the test of time, that is still our favorite, this or that. And we thought actually that's kind of a little bit useful in its own right, reflecting back to that, as well as kind of looking at what we consider to be some of the advances and some of the projections moving forward. And again, like Lucas said it really well, in terms of just saying this is just our point of view. There's absolutely zero sponsorship elements to anything we talk about tonight. In some ways, I wish there was, because I love.
Well, I can't say that. I can't say that unequivocally. I guess I'm listed as an ambassador for certain brands that I'll be talking about, which I'll mention. But I have to be very clear, just as you bring that up, Paul, that I'm not doing that because I'm making heaps of oodles and oodles of money for saying that. I actually have, in most cases, reached out to the brand because I actually really love using that gear, and it's just nice to have that brand association. So it's a very genuine kind of agreement there, and not necessarily something where I'm pushing it because I'm making a monetary gain. But I still think I better mention if I've been working with a particular brand. And when I say working, normally it's you do a post on social, you might get a discount if you buy it yourself, sort of thing. It's nothing like I'm able to buy a house or something like that with the profits. So, but yes, I may be in a different position to Paul there, to a certain degree, but it's definitely
well, my point was a little bit more that there's no direct affiliation with the show with anyone.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah,
certainly, That's what I meant. Like, certainly individually, and I actually think, like what Luke's done in particular with Sony, I think has been a really it's been really beautiful to watch that relationship kind of build and give you a little bit more of a platform to connect with people and to share your knowledge. And it's kind of a beautiful thing. I feel slightly unlucky that, there goes my camera, that Canon's kind of gone off the radar a little bit in terms of Australia in particular. But that's just trends, like I did get actually asked to be an ambassador for Nikon a long time ago when I was doing a big 7 or 8 city tour through New Zealand. It was perfect timing. But the reality is, none of these companies very rarely are actually paying photographers. It's more like you might get to borrow gear, or like Luke said, you get a discount on things, which is handy. But it's very, very unusual to get a dynamic. Just to give you guys a bit of a sense of industry perspective, in case you're sort of wondering how it works, it's usually a long relationship that needs to be built up over time, with a lot of trust sort of involved, and usually a lot of effort on the photographer, almost like pro bono for a long time before you sort of get enough runs on the board that they might consider you for their team. So it's a long game, basically, and it's not necessarily one that puts food on the table or money in the bank, but it can sort of pay dividends over time.
Yeah, absolutely. My association with Sony has been absolutely life-changing for me, and I guess the biggest thing that's happened to me with that is being able to be sent to Antarctica and help to facilitate the photography program for Intrepid. Sony has provided a loan kit to participants on the Intrepid photography program. And they're also sending out over Sony advocates, which act as a Sony ambassador on board and help everyone that's on the photography program use the Sony equipment, because sometimes the photo guides that are leading those photography programs don't shoot Sony themselves. And so it's a bit rough to give the participants a Sony camera and then all of a sudden get the guides to help them with all this Sony menus that might be very foreign to them. So being able to have an association, I guess just to put some background to that, I think I've started to introduce myself to Sony and try and get some attention from them probably since about 2013 or maybe even 2012. So it's as Paul said, it's a very long game. It's not the sort of thing where you just make a phone call and you're an ambassador or what have you the next day. And also there's a lot of work that you need to put into it to maintain the relationship and not let that subside. So there's definitely sometimes it's very all well and good to be able to call yourself an ambassador, but there is a lot that has to happen. There's work associated with that. So having all of these names next to you isn't always as straightforward as it might sound. You're not just showered in free equipment and then you're set for life kind of thing. It's quite a bit different than that. So but that's it. But at the end of the day, I can't stress enough how fantastic it is to be able to actually have a relationship with the equipment that you're actually using, and even being able to provide feedback about that and improve it is a huge thing to be able to be part of.
Yeah, I think good equipment goes a long way, and I think what you said about, I think building up a relationship with your gear in terms of a directly tangible, physical, intellectual, mental thing is actually really significant. Like I was stuck with, even though I've used just about every brand under the sun over the years, I've kind of stuck with the core of Canon for that whole time, and it's so intuitive to me, their system and their menu, that I can pretty much shoot in the dark and not even look at things to know what I'm doing. And
There's a beautiful consistency with their menus, isn't there, as well?
yeah, they've kept that thread really beautifully consistent through, even almost back through, well, not quite film days, but from right early on all the way through. And they're probably renowned, arguably as the most accessible and easy to learn and intuitive menu system of any of the major brands on the market. And I think, but you can just learn anything. It's just a matter of practice and time. I do feel like, some people say that about Mac computers versus PC. They're initially more intuitive, but at the same time, there's pros and cons to both. Like a PCs are usually cheaper and less expensive and more interchangeable, for instance, but you need to do a little bit more work and maybe take a little bit of a hit on the, at least in the old days, in terms of their security sort of elements and things like that. So everything evolves over time, and having shot for 30 years pretty hard out, it's been funny watching things and reflecting maybe tonight on the really consistent things that don't change. Good glass is good glass, whether it's 20 years old or 10 years old or 5 years old. When you've got a sharp lens, and that really hasn't changed. In fact, you could say some of the older lenses are probably even sharper than some of the newer ones in terms of the caliber of material and stuff they were using in the day, especially ones that were directly out of Japan. Where
Cool.
where do
Maybe
where do you want to
oh,
start?
I was just thinking, we're just talking about cameras. We might as well just kick off with that, because
Yeah.
obviously it's pretty hard to take a photo without a camera. So although photography, I guess you can use other equipment other than a camera to actually make an image, like maybe a microscope, or I don't know, a telescope. So it doesn't have to be a camera, of course, but although I guess there needs to be a camera on the end to take the shot. So I'm thinking more about lenses there. That's my bad. But in terms of the equipment, you were just talking about Canon, and I actually did start shooting Canon myself. And it really, if it wasn't for like the Sony bringing out a Metabones redemption program back in the mid 20, well, it's around 2013, 2014. They actually, when they released the A7R, they provided you the opportunity to get a free adapter, so you could adapt the Canon lenses onto the Sony body. And without that redemption program, I don't, which the Metabones adapters are about $500, so it was a considerable cost. And so by being able to get this free adapter so I could put all of my Canon lenses straight on the Sony body, I was able to trial out the Sony cameras. And from that point on, I did switch over to Sony. And so it's quite likely, if they didn't have that Metabones redemption program, and also have the A7R released at a pretty nice price point that had a really nice sensor in it, I may have very well been still shooting with Canon. It was very challenging for Canon for a period of time, with Nikon also having some incredible high dynamic range cameras coming out. And as a landscape photographer, it was very, very tempting to want to switch to Nikon as well, because of those amazing sensors. But when Sony released the A7R, it had the same sensor in it as, I think, the D810. And so you have this tiny little camera. So my A7R, actually the original camera body's right here. So it's quite a tiny little body, really. And so that's now my infrared camera. But if it wasn't for that Metabones setup, then it would have been a very different kind of scenario for me, potentially. I probably would have spent way less money too, I'd imagine. I can't imagine how much money I've spent on camera equipment over the years, but it'd be in the hundreds of thousands, I would have thought, all up.
Yeah, I tend to, my approach with most equipment, and this stretches out to outdoor equipment or clothes that I wear, all sorts of things, is I tend to get something really good and just make it last. So I mean, I'm still using my 5D Mark IIIs and my 5DSR, and in situations where I don't need super low light, kind of or high ISO circumstances, they still, for the outcomes that I'm looking for the jobs that I'm doing, they actually still work really well. So it's still a compliment. In a perfect world, I'd have a fleet of all the latest and greatest mirrorless cameras, but it's just there's a lot of those adapters that Luke was talking about have made that transition, for instance, from traditional DSLR to mirrorless quite easy. So I don't find it much of a drama at all to be using older and newer lenses. So I'm slowly transitioning my body of lenses to the new RF ones for Canon, because they are a little bit quicker. They do have sort of better built-in image stabilization. They're usually quite a bit snappier with the focus, but they've done such a good job on these Canon adapters that I literally, and I actually got a real surprise when I found this out. I had a chat to James Simmons, who's an old friend from the APP, who's won the wedding photography of the year a few times, and he has a strong affiliation with Canon now. And he started using some of his old slow EF lenses with the new adapter, and they started focusing way faster than they ever did before through the added technology in the adapter, because it has more connection points in a simplistic sort of way than the other traditional lens mounts do. So there's more information going back and forwards between lens and the camera, and there's a lot more capacity for them to talk to each other quicker and more accurately. So funny enough, just by using that adapter, I'm getting better performance out of my older lenses, which I never would have expected. Like in the early days with Sony, I remember the old Metabones and the autofocus was not a fun combination of things. From those very, very early times, I remember trying one of Lucky's out. I don't know, it might have been 5 or 6 years ago or something, and just going, all right, that's pretty good for a tripod, but I won't be using it for a wedding anytime soon. Like it. But they've really, everything's caught up to speed a lot. That's probably the biggest change in the last 2 or 3 years since we've done the show. I reckon is most of the brands have caught up with each other. Sony kind of did the research really early on, and so they hit the market with their feet running really fast with the mirrorless in particular, and they ran with it pretty hard and fast. And Canon in particular was falling way behind. And as of late, I'd say they're really generally quite on par. Like I wouldn't be, if I was just totally an unaffiliated person who was just suggesting what systems people go for, I really don't think there's an obvious clear winner. There's a few delineations, for a while there, particular Sony, if you're into video, was better with low light video. Canon sort of jumped the gun for a little while with their 8K when it came out, the egg frying technology that Luke often jokes about. That overheated the camera. They sort of jumped the gun a bit too fast on that, but firmware updates are sorting a lot of those things out. Nikon's just released the Z8, Z9 last year, and oh my god, they are utterly world class. Fuji's done a brilliant job of doing its sort of medium format sort of systems and making it quite accessible and quite what's the word? The portability on the medium format systems is pretty amazing, and their capacity. So yeah, Luke and I were talking about this before. Like, who's got the sort of share of the market, as it were? Is this a market-based one?
Yeah, I think this is it's just looking at number of shipments in 2023 based on this particular research company anyway. So Canon, according to this research, has still got quite a large. I've seen others that suggest a different number, but still around 50% of the market. Sony around the sort of quarter. Then Nikon's, maybe 12%. You got a bit of Fuji and Panasonic sort of making it up from there. And then it's interesting too, they have one about the image sensor here as well. And so you can see that Sony has the dominance in terms of the actual imaging sensor side of things. I don't know where Canon fit in here unless they're getting someone else, one of these guys, to actually make it for them. But
my understanding, they've been supplying the Nikon sensors for a long time, but I'm not sure whether Canon sort of fits into the sensor side of things. That's a good question.
Yeah. I'm not sure if they're making them themselves anymore or have another company making them on their behalf. But in any case, Sony have a big dominance in terms of actually making the sensors, and I guess it would have been interesting even from 2 years ago to see how the difference here. But I think, when I was shooting Sony, I think their percent of the market share for digital cameras when I started out probably would have been in very much under 5% or next to nothing. So to be able to build up to quite a large part of the market share within that amount of time has been pretty amazing. It's interesting they're saying that Canon and Nikon were growing here, whereas Sony actually did retract a little bit. So, but that's just one sort of analyst group, although it is a Japanese one, so it probably would be quite reputable, I would have thought. But I just thought I would share that just to give a bit of perspective. And Canon's still very much a player, even though I live in Sony world, so that's all I generally hear about. So but yes, it's not like there's been a ginormous change there, I would have thought.
Well, I think what would be even more interesting is looking at the trends of where DSLRs are dropping away, point shoots are almost disappearing, mirrorless is moving forward. Like there's a 3-tier kind of element to the style of cameras that most people are buying. And sometimes it feels like some of the brands are kind of feeding towards the professional market a little bit more, and some are more nurturing the more amateur market, and so that can get a bit frustrating. I felt like Canon was doing that for a long time. They kind of shifted their gears and their interest more to the amateur market and weren't really looking after the professionals as much. And I would say actually Apple did the same thing. They had these beautiful, gorgeous matte screens that were brilliant for editing on and doing photo work and filming and all sorts of things. And they decided that, people in terms of the mainstream market were more interested in watching movies and having high contrast. So they shifted their whole fleet to high gloss kind of reflective screens, which actually was a real disappointment. I used to have I had the last of the 17-inch Apple Mac screens, and I still feel like it's the best laptop screen I ever had. So it's sort of, market shift, markets move, and the emphasis of the different companies kind of shifts a little bit. Like Sony's gotten really active in Australia, for instance, and is really supportive of a lot of events, and they're taking on a lot of different people and quite a lot of wide range of genres. Whereas in Australia, I've noticed Canon's basically just pulled the plug on most things and really pulled out, and a lot of the community sort of groups and events and things they're having, they just sort of all disappeared. So it's sort of, whereas 10 years ago they were sponsoring appers and really quite involved and had a really strong ambassador sort of crew. So it's sort of things sort of evolved. Nikon jumped in there probably 8 or 9 years ago and started pushing a real agenda for the education side of things and students, and which is where I got a knock on the door when I was doing the tour, because they were really trying to get into the Australian New Zealand market on a student kind of level and get people interested. So it's sort of, there's ebbs and flows and roundabouts, and that's the perspective I have, I guess, because I've been doing it for a few decades rather than just recently. So I feel like, look, I don't know about how you feel, but I feel like it's pretty hard to go backwards from mirrorless. Like it's still, I shoot both, and I do shoot both regularly, but I have to have a pretty good reason not to use the mirrorless
absolutely. Just even just for being able to look into that EVF and being able to play a shot back if you're in a really bright environment and you can't see the LCD, you can look into the viewfinder, press play, and still interact with the photo. You can zoom into the photo through the viewfinder. I really like looking through the EVF, electronic viewfinder, to actually be able to focus on stars more accurately, whereas the LCD can be quite a bit harder. Having a look at that EVF, you've just got a little bit more detail, or it's a bit easier, especially with the newer cameras that have a higher resolution EVF. I've also got a bit of a presentation here, just a few slides anyhow, just to show about some of the things you might think about when you're looking at cameras and the selection process as part of that. And so, obviously a big consideration is going to be the resolution, and we're wanting the resolution to match the output, which is a bit like what Paul was saying earlier. You're not wanting to put out a camera that buy a camera. You don't need to buy a phase 1 if you're not printing that big. You could if you wanted to, just because it's nice to use and it's fun to spend your money that way. But realistically, if you're just posting on Instagram, the resolution's probably, I think it's less than 1 megapixel that goes up on Instagram. So you don't actually need a very high resolution camera if that's all you're doing. So that's a really important thing to consider when it comes to that. And then we've got for landscape photography, generally we're wanting above 36 megapixels. I still feel like 24 is enough in a lot of cases, but if you're wanting to print big, you're generally wanting more than 36, and I think I'm at 61. So it really depends on what kind of system that you're looking at there.
I'll jump in there quickly. There's a parallel there with the improvements in technology, and programs like Gigapixel, Topaz Gigapixel, and even actually Photoshop itself have made massive improvements in the last 2 or 3 years in terms of their capacity to upsize images up to 6 times and still give you pretty reasonable results. So the difference between a 24 and a 36 is not necessarily as big as it was if you're willing to use and lean into the resources of some of the software as well. So if you're tossing up between one and the other, a big difference between 21 and 60, no two ways about it. But anyway, I'll let you carry on from there, Lucky. But I just thought.
Oh, you're right, mate. Also, I just thought I'd switch to this one too. This one just is a graph I found just showing the sales of DSLRs and how that's really been impacted since 2012. Which I guess for me, that's sort of when I started to get into mirrorless myself. I think I got my Sony A7R around here, so you can really see that very rapid decline there in DSLRs and. Basically, nowadays it's almost only 90% decrease over where it was also. And I guess there's going to always be a little bit, but I did read an article recently suggesting that because of the European legislation around needing to have a USB port for charging, a lot of the older DSLRs and things like that don't have that. And so whether or not the camera manufacturers are going to want to do that might actually put it into the DSLR sales altogether. I don't know if I know that Sony haven't made a DSLR for a long time, but I don't know if Canon, have they actually delisted their DSLRs? Do you know, Paul?
No, I think that's a good question. I'd literally have to look. Like if they have, it would have been pretty recent. What they have done, which has taken a long time in coming, is all of a sudden this year in particular, they've released a whole bunch of kind of lower level mirrorless cameras, which they never had on the market before. They kept it up at the kind of full frame only sort of level for a long, long time, and then they sort of now there's like a fleet of lower end R8 and R10 and other sort of versions that are and R7 even that are just increments which is the kind of platform and the way they approach their marketing and their equipment sort of spread with DSLR. So they're mirroring sort of what they used to do, but it's been quite a big gap. So I couldn't think of a good reason that I would go to a DSLR over a mirrorless camera.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
A couple of years ago, I could say, well, the battery life is offered a lot better in DSLRs in particular. And when you're doing a lot of remote area stuff like I do, that was quite significant. And in the early days, that was actually really significant. I remember the early Sonys in particular.
Yeah, just on that, these are the two different batteries. So try and do it in a way. So you can see the differences in size here. The one on the right-hand side there is the older battery. The left is, so you can see there's quite a sizable difference there between them. And so the real issue wasn't necessarily that the battery was a poor battery. It was that it's just much smaller. There's a lot less lithium ion actually in there to power the devices. What's this one? You've got 2,280 milliamp hours on the larger FZ battery, and 1,500 on the smaller one, which is probably generous for a generic one like this one. But the point being that the big change, and if you are still using that older NP battery on a Sony camera, you'll notice a massive difference if you upgrade to the larger FZ batteries in a line with that. And yes, Sony copped a big flack for the batteries initially, but I would also say that they were tiny, and they made the ability for the camera bodies to be really small, and they never were smaller than. I mean, they've only got bigger since. This is an absolutely tiny camera body. That's a big thing. But yes, Sony and batteries was a real problem, and actually,
my point is that there's really not so much difference between them now. Like Canon actually did us all a favor, and you could still use all your batteries all the way back from 15 years ago in the new mirrorless cameras. So I've still got my 9 batteries that I use all the time. But they did recognize the significance of running the EVF in particular is pretty thirsty. So they've actually built a higher capacity battery, and I've just noticed actually they've actually stopped the sales of the old battery altogether, Lukey, and you have to buy
Okay.
the newer high resolution one just in the last few months. But they are backwards compatible with the older cameras as well. It's just basically a high capacity battery. So I consider the higher capacity battery on par or close to on par with maybe what my DSLR was batteries were in terms of the amount of images I got out of the field. But I certainly noticed a drop when it went straight to mirrorless with the same older cameras, probably like a 35% drop in terms of the longer end of things. So EVFs are thirsty, and that's a management issue when you're out in the field. Luke in particular is really good at coming up with solars and power banks and different things that can sort of keep you in the loop or keep you steady, depending on the compatibility of your actual physical camera. Like I could literally unplug my laptop from my Apple computer and stick it into my camera and charge it like from one to the other, like it was just with the same laptop cord. And I actually didn't realize that for ages. And sometimes I find
Yeah, but there's one thing that, and I don't want to rag on Canon, but I believe it has to be a certain output of power to actually work. Like if you don't have enough juice coming from that USB-C, it won't charge at all. I don't know if that's correct or not.
I imagine that's true. But so I guess I've had the high-end MacBook Pros. I've always had the higher end transformers, so I haven't got a lower one to compare. But
like I just remember hearing someone ran into a problem there, and I thought that's a bit frustrating that if you didn't if you can't just plug any old power bank in there and charge the camera, it had to be a certain output. It may have been addressed now. Certainly with Sony, I can just plug in whatever I like, and even if it's a slow charge, it will trickle charge, but at least something will happen there.
It'll still trickle on the lower. Yeah, okay, that's a difference I wasn't so aware of, Loki. That's good to know.
Yeah, so it's that hopefully that's something that Canon can address, because it really should be I guess it's a different thing if you're trying to power the camera directly from that battery, but more so if you're just trying to charge. I do see Isotech on the comments saying that I might have some sense there, so that's nice to hear. But yeah, that's just something to catch out if you're looking to charge those sort of cameras directly. Just have to be careful if you have a certain power output.
It's probably one of the advantages of the Sony's cameras being smaller is, they don't have as higher capacity need. So that could be more of an advantage in the field, maybe in there.
It's very handy, actually. If I had, say, this camera here, I can have it set up on my tripod, and I can plug a power bank into this. It does need to have a battery inside, but it doesn't have to be even a fully charged battery. But I can plug a power bank into the camera and then actually run my time lapse off of the power bank, which might be a 20,000 milliamp hour power bank. So I can actually run probably all night and all day with that amount of power. And once the power bank runs out, then it will switch over to the battery. So the need for a battery grip, at least in that sort of situation, isn't very necessary. And it's really nice in those situations where you don't want to have to change over batteries mid sort of shoot like that. So it's a special case scenario, but it's definitely very handy to be able to power it directly from a power bank like that. Yeah. How about I switch back to the rest of the Prezzo I had here as well, just in terms of
through that, yeah.
Just some of the considerations. I mean, they're probably pretty straightforward, but you often will hear people recommending full frame, and so this is just a good illustration of why full frame is a good idea. You can really see how much more light collection potential a full frame sensor has, especially when you're comparing it to iPhones are probably a little bit larger than that now. But Micro Four Thirds and APS-C is considerably less. And so if you're trying to do any night photography or anything like that, having a larger surface area to catch that light on is always going to be a more advantageous thing. Although with computational imagery now and the amount that AI can do and make up for deficiencies and interpolation and those kind of things, it may be a case where a phone sensor is enough. And I've been able to take some pretty incredible astro shots even just with my Samsung Galaxy camera. So that sort of gives a bit more of an illustration in terms of having large photo sites or large pixel sites on the camera sensor. You're able to collect a lot more of this photon rain than if you had a smaller one. And that's probably more talking to the density of those photo sites. So if you have a higher resolution camera, like a high megapixel camera, if you had a 100 megapixel camera, for example, on a full frame body, which doesn't really exist, I think, then you're going to have a really small photo site because you have to cram all of those pixels onto the same size sensor. So this is why having a low resolution camera for night photography could be a good idea, although you could also say that you could downsample a high resolution image to a lower resolution and maybe get a similar result. But so that it's just probably some more higher level concepts there around the actual sizes of those photo sites.
Look,
I like
if we go backwards, Lucky, on that, like what's the effective difference? Like when would you say somebody really needs or is going to get a huge advantage out of a full frame sensor as opposed to an APS-C?
Oh, there's a massive difference. I've seen it. It's really hard to refute that if you have a bigger surface area, like on this one here, you're going to be able to pick up so much more light. Anytime I sort of help someone with their night photography and they're using a APS-C camera, it's always a much harder effort. You're having to push their lenses further. They're just not, the lenses are generally smaller, so they're not pulling in as much light in their own right as well. So it's a huge difference. And so if you are really trying to do a lot of low light night photography, you'll notice a massive jump in improvement going to a full frame over an APS-C or Micro Four Thirds kind of setup. Having said that, sometimes a larger camera isn't suitable for people. So again, the best job is the one, best camera is the one you have. But that's a really good reason to upgrade if you're looking to do a lot more low light stuff, in my opinion.
Yeah, that was kind of my point. Like, I think if people are generally shooting at bright light and it's less noticeable, and where I personally find the difference is low light difference is huge, and maybe the gradation of tone through like a sky gradating through, you'll notice that there's a lot more subtlety and grace of movement between tones in a frame, but at the same time, if you're traveling and one light camera and you're only going to be shooting in higher light, it's kind of less important than you think. And the advantages of maybe the APS-C systems is they're lighter. And so for travel cameras in particular, they can be really quite nice and useful. So I wouldn't say that.
And yeah.
Oh, you go. But yeah, I was trying to give people like a usable line where, like, if I'm not going to be doing a lot of low light stuff and I want to travel and light's important, you'll still get some pretty good results out of some of the better APS-C cameras, is my point. But if you want to really low light stuff and you really want to push like fine art printing in particular, you are going to notice quite a big difference in terms of the investment. And then the parallel is there are different lenses that are designed specifically to work with APS-C cameras that then if you upgrade later, you then can't necessarily use them again on your full frame camera. So there's a few like long-term considerations to look at when you're getting into the different systems.
Yeah, I generally feel like at least if you're looking into the Sony system, if you go in like a camera like the A7 III, you can buy a secondhand for $1,500 or less, which is really not a ginormous investment. And that camera is extremely good for the price. I'd say it's the best value for money camera I know of, and that's big enough to get A2 prints out of. It's probably the best low light camera that Sony has for that sort of resolution versus low light performance. So there's not like a huge reason to not get full frame. Even the size of it's not particularly big and heavy. So that's just a very landscape centric perspective. If you're doing a lot of bird photography or stuff that's more telephoto, often there's an advantage with the crop factor shooting with APS-C and having smaller, lighter lenses associated with that too. I know that for Olympus, you can be shooting at 800 millimeters using this tiny, was it a 100 to 400 lens or something, like 200 to 400 lens, and in such a small body getting such a long reach from that. So there's definitely benefits in some of those other systems to consider, but yeah, so I think you'd be hard pressed to find too many professional full-time landscape photographers that don't use a full frame camera or like larger sensors than that. I guess that is something that was missing from the particular diagram I had. I didn't really have anything larger than full frame, which a lot of phase one would be a ginormous size on top of full frame there. So you can obviously go bigger. I certainly, I don't know if you've ever looked at going bigger than a full frame, Paul, but for me, I always got sort of when I started looking at the lenses for low light photography and some of those other aspects, I started to get scared off a little bit, I suppose. There's just not
Yeah,
as much.
there's usually not as much range or choice, and the investments like is huge. Like I have used phase one cameras, and I waited till I had half reasonable autofocus before, because my main focus was doing high end aerial images where I wanted to do 2 meter prints. So I had to be able to shoot, when I'm out of an airplane window at 200 k's an hour and still be able to like focus or figure that out. So when they brought their, I think it was the QF backs on or whichever one it was, and they suddenly were more manageable by hand, whereas earlier on they kind of almost needed to be on a tripod and that's it. And they had limited capacity to engage with fast moving subjects or the breadth or the wider sort of genres. Really good for commercial work, landscape work, things where things are quite static, but they fell short in terms of action and movement in particular. And I feel like Fuji came in with their system that was quite a lot lighter and maybe a little bit more versatile and clever in terms of the capacity and the different sort of genres you could use them for. And they've kept that thread. I mean, phase one has definitely kept up in their game and in terms of the quality. And if you look, like I literally joke about it when I see, even now, even some of my old phase files, it just looks like cream and butter dripping down the screen. I just want to eat it. I just want to lick it. It just looks freaking delicious. And like when I'm judging a lot of work and I see maybe, particularly for a while there, Tony Hewitt was using phase one a lot. And one, I recognize the style of his work, but two, I recognize a phase file in an instant, just in terms of how it translates to print. Like the gradation of tones is unbelievable. It's just so delicious and so clearly superior. It was kind of like, I mean, that being said, I've been judging for a decade, so my eye is quite tuned to that sort of thing. But yeah, so there's certain jobs that I've hired them for certain reasons. I used the early Pentax system for a while there, when they went into their kind of medium format system, and that was probably the most affordable system for quite a while, the 645 and 645Z. And I do feel like the Fuji is probably the best maybe sweet spot on the market for bang for the buck and versatility if you want to move into that medium format kind of realm. But now that gap between the high end mirrorless cameras and the kind of medium to lower end medium format cameras is very, very little. Like if you know how to manage the files well, which is another skill again, there's less of a difference. And that didn't used to be the case, but I'd say like the gap's bridging between them now. I don't know if you feel any different about Lurkley, but I think
I haven't really even looked, to be honest, much about what's been happening in that. I think that's one thing I've just been able to work out. There was definitely a time where I was looking at Fuji and interested in at least understanding what there was to offer there and that kind of thing. I guess now I know for sure that and I'm very heavily invested in full frame, but I would say that I see it definitely as the sweet spot in my opinion. It's definitely a really nice. I
think
nice flexibility and yeah.
The standout difference to me in terms of what's on the market in terms of the major brands is if you want something really, really light and really, really portable, but still really quite capable, is Olympus system is so small and so light, and even their lenses are just like, you're just like, is that it? 100 to 400, and I've even known some pros that have shifted to that just because they're having neck issues or back issues or they didn't need the refined results you get out of a 2 meter print anymore for the kind of output they're looking for. So definitely think output backwards.
Expedition photographer I was working with in Antarctica shot Olympus, and he was always delighting in the fact that he could, shoot out on the Zodiac and then go back into the shower and just take the Olympus in the shower with him to rinse it off, kind of thing, because of how good the weather sealing is. I don't know if he actually did that, but the point being that there's certainly some big advantages with some of those other systems and having proprietary housings and things like that are pretty amazing. So that's definitely a consideration.
Well,
I still think the low light performance aspects for me would make it super challenging to really do that, but not everyone does that, so that's not an issue.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I noticed it more when I started hanging around with Mr. Luke Tscharke going on more night shoots. I noticed it more then than I did before because a lot of the work that I was doing was in regular kind of light conditions. So, it was a tripod where it didn't really matter because I was just doing longer exposures and not putting the ISO up. But
so for me, like when I'm looking at lenses or cameras rather, low light performance is a huge thing to consider. But that's often like not for everybody. And I guess like I was indicating earlier, another really good one is weather seals and having good weather resistance generally. But I think you probably agree, Paul. Most cameras these days are pretty much on par with each other, or maybe Nikon's got a pretty good name for weather sealing. I'm sure Canon have pretty good. I think Sony's always had a bad name for it, not that I know why. But one thing I can say, certainly when it comes to weather sealing, is when it comes to your camera and the hot shoe cover, which is right here, if my camera wants to focus on that. But that there, if you don't have that in place, you run the risk of having exposed contacts on the top of your lens there, and camera.
Do you want to explain what that is? It's not super obvious. We just look at it. It's a separate individual piece that fills in the gap.
Yeah, so you basically have the top hot shoe cover, which is there. You can see I've labeled my cameras as well, so I know which one I'm dealing with. And then you've got a piece of plastic there that actually sits into the top there. It goes in more like this. It's a bit hard to do it when you're filming like that, but so that slots in there. And basically, if you don't have that in there, you've got some electrical contacts that are kind of exposed. And if you're shooting around the ocean or in the salt water or what have you, and you get some water on that and moisture in there, you can start to get some errors. And so that can make it look like the camera is not very good at being weather sealed, but realistically, you shouldn't have that cap and out and leaving those contacts exposed. It can get corrosion in there and cause quite a few issues. So a 15-cent piece of plastic like that could ruin your camera if it's not in place, basically. So it is a really important thing to make sure that they're there and they're in place.
I've got the same. I can't take it to show you because it's literally the camera that I'm filming with right now, but mine actually has a little level on it as well. So it's not amazing, but it's actually slightly handy for putting on a tripod and just having that level on the top as well. It's probably,
I know the one you mean. Yeah.
The most vulnerable. It's the most vulnerable part of the camera to moisture in particular and salt water in particular. And being on the top, of course, it's probably more vulnerable than being on the bottom because you're most likely to get a wave coming over or rains coming down from the top rather than the bottom up. So it's not just about the body though. Like there are lenses that have very, very different levels of weather sealing in them. Like I had a long conversation with myself about the new there's 100 to 400 Canon that came out that's really, really light. It's now become one of my favorite lenses, but it has zero weather sealing in it. And when I was going to Iceland and the Arctic this year, and I saw the 100 to 500, and I was kind of like, oh, that's got all the weather sealing, but it's $5,500 as opposed to $1,000. And the autofocus is almost the same. So it's not just, you've got to be a little bit clever. There are certain lenses on the market. Are we ready to start talking about lenses, Lucky? We've kind of done the camera thing.
Oh, yeah, why not? Why not? We haven't said what cameras we use.
I just realized it's going sideways. But so one of the things I was thinking about, what can I show that's changed in the last few years is what are some of the new lenses that I use that I feel like are a sweet spot. So this is a Canon RF lens. I don't know if it's going to focus on it. There we go. And it's 100 to 400 range. It's super light. I can actually literally stick it in my pocket and carry it around. And I often do actually in a raincoat or in a jacket. And whereas the 100 to 500 is probably about that long and about that wide and maybe 2.5 times heavier. And when I spoke to the Canon rep and I was thinking, oh yeah, the focus is going to be half as good or blah, blah, blah. And he was like, yeah, no, because it's an RF lens and it has the 12 contacts as opposed to the old 8. It's actually super snappy and really fast, and I hardly noticed any difference at all. And the autofocus speed, which was really surprising, I was like, "This is $1,000 plastic lens as opposed to $5,500 L lens." But there are certain lenses that come and I've noticed this across different brands that hit like a little sweet spot where they're actually really good bang for the buck for what they are. Like for instance, this is a new little RF 50 mil, and I got it for like $220 or something.
Oh, the nifty 50s.
And it's a 1.8 lens, and the focus is really good, and it's super light. Like I've got no reason not to have that in my pocket or take it with me anywhere, and it doesn't really matter to me so much if I break it or not that I treat it badly or anything, but my point is I don't have the same stress and worry that I do with some of the bigger, heavier lenses. And if I want to go light, like I would hesitate a lot to take a big 100 to 400 lens on a bushwalk for, or up a mountain or somewhere where weight's a really big issue. And I do not hesitate for a second to pop this thing because it weighs almost nothing. And so in terms of the amount of time I then spend shooting with that focal length has actually doubled now because I have such a light, easy, accessible lens that I don't have a reason to hesitate, and it's always there. And I can even literally just have it in my pocket. Sometimes I do. So
Yeah, I've got there's one I've been using recently that's a bit similar. This is the new Sony 100. Sorry, it's a 70 to 200, but it's actually quite small and compact for a 70 to 200. So just maybe it sort of gives you a bit of an idea of the size of it. Very compact. It does have a bit of an extension as you go out, which you'd expect. But it also is a macro as well. So if you put especially a 1.4 times teleconverter on it, turns it into, I think it's a 1-to-1 macro as well. So I'm actually absolutely in love with this lens. So I'm borrowing this one from Sony at the moment, but I want to buy it because, like Paul said, having that versatility in a like a more compact size, but still, this is actually an f4 lens all the way through as well. It means that you've got a lot of versatility, and I've got a macro lens here, but I'm probably going to sell this macro lens, even though this may not be quite on the same par as a macro. I'm not like a crazy macro shooter, and I'm very rarely going to have a macro lens sort of out there with me. So if anyone wants to buy a 90mm macro, let me know. But because I'm more of an opportunistic macro shooter, and I'd have this lens with me anyway, I'd already have macro. Whereas this lens I'd have to specifically have in the bag if I was wanting to shoot some macro. So it's really great to be able to.
Quite unusual to have a zoom lens that's a macro, yeah. Like I haven't seen much of that at all. I've only really seen because it was really surprising when I saw that lens. We had a client on our last workshop that was using it the whole time, and I was like, "A 7200 macro? I don't know who's done that. I didn't know they even existed or they could even make them."
Yeah, I mean, macro, like telephoto focal lengths are used for macro photography. Not infrequently, and it's not going to be the same sort of capacity that a dedicated macro lens is going to have. But realistically, I very rarely go out and do that, so that's why. But yes, I guess I think it's the first time Sony's kind of had a macro component to a telephoto zoom like that. But for me, the other really amazing thing is it performs almost flawlessly in infrared as well, which is a whole nother beast entirely, but very good. Whereas all of my other telephoto lenses had a hotspot for infrared, so that sort of sealed the deal for me when it came to that. But yeah, I'm a big advocate of what you're saying there, Paul, in terms of finding you don't necessarily have to go out and buy the top of the line telephoto lens. Sometimes it's the one that can just fit in your bag and you're willing to lug around. I know something like the old Canon 70 to 200 2.8, whilst it's a beautiful lens, it's just some of them are just so heavy that you really had to decide whether you wanted to take them into your bag or not, and then you just don't have that with you. So there's always that sort of trade-off that you have to play
I've
with.
been using that particular lens for 15 years. I've got two of them still. And particularly when I go on bigger trips or international trips, that's always a big question mark about whether I can do it and use it. So just to finish that conversation I had about the 100 to 400, because I felt like I gave the 100 to 500 a hard time. I borrowed that lens off a good friend of mine, Andrew Phipps, after some pretty serious negotiation and a lot of insurance. And I have to say, it's one of the best lenses I've used in my life. Like if you're going to spend the money on a lens and you want that sort of range, the versatility of 100 to 500 from anything from compressed landscapes to portraits to wildlife to bird life is absolutely amazing. And
does it work with a teleconverter as well?
And also had a teleconverter that I did a 1.4 teleconverter. And if you have a look at some of my shots from the Svalbard, the Cold Edge show I did probably a month ago or so on our channel, a lot of them were taken with the 1.4 times converter. So it was about 700 odd reach. So if you've got the money and, that lens is probably going to last a lot longer, it's going to be optically crisper from edge to edge. It's not going to be soft in the corners, which is probably often one of the first things you notice when you get good glass as opposed to kind of cheaper glass. In the middle are usually a little bit more on par, but on the edges in particular, the cheaper lenses often fall away. The other issue is often the more expensive lenses have they're a lot more lightened, so the apertures can be a lot more wider open often, whereas the cheaper lenses tend to be stopped down quite a lot. So that's one of the physical differences. And then the weather sealing, like for a place like Iceland and the Arctic, I knew it was really important to have weather sealing, or else, particularly in Iceland on this particular trip, if I didn't have it, I wouldn't have been doing so much shooting. But that being said, I paid $70 just for one of those kind of stretchy weather protector things where you could seal around the lens, and you can get around things, like I use a shower cap sometimes and just stretch it from the lip of the lens protector to the back end of the flash holder, and it covers most of the top of the camera. And it costs like $1, and I usually just have one sitting around in my bag in case I have an emergency. I need to cover it up.
Yeah, the rain sleeves are really good for that too. You can find them, or just a plastic or Ziploc bag if it's a smaller lens, and get a large Ziploc bag and poke a hole in the end and just put that over. That they can work really great. So as long as you just keep monitoring that you're not getting condensation inside the bag, and then you're sort of defeating the whole purpose of having that weather protection. Using your lens hood is also a great idea too, just to keep any drops or anything off the front of the lens, obviously, as well, which is always a good idea. What would you say is your, like, if you could only take one lens and one lens only? I guess it depends what you're shooting, but do you have
I have a pretty clear idea of that. Like, I just saw a comment by one of our guests tonight on the show, actually, that they just pointed that Canon in particular do not weather seal their non-L series lenses, and L are their higher end, kind of more professional lenses, whereas Nikon do seal their non-S series lenses for their Z cameras. So that's an example of where there's a slight difference between two brands, for instance. So, I mean, as a focal range for a travel/landscape photographer, 24-105, so it's not really focusing too well. It's hard to beat 24-105 as an overall range. And so I always have two lenses just sitting in my bag ready to go. And I have a 50mm 1.4, in this case 1.8, and a 24-105. And so this one is very versatile in terms of landscape, portrait, compressed things. It can it's wide enough to shoot most things. It's long enough to get a little bit of reach. And with a bigger sensor camera like mine, I can crop as well. Whereas this serves a different purpose. If I want to do a really wide open bokeh and I want to do portrait work, or sometimes even stitching work, what's been the case for a long period of time is 50mm lenses are very, very, they're kind of very, what's the word? They're very cost effective to make. And they're quite easy to build really good optics into. And so that means all the way back through to the 1950s and 60s, the 50mm was often the sharpest glass you'd get, even on the older lenses, because they're just quite clean and easy and crisp to make. They don't need as much kind of shift in terms of barrel distortion and that kind of thing. They're very consistent proportionally with whatever you're shooting. And so those two lenses, and because that weighs nothing and it doesn't cost too much, it's just easy to pop it in next to it anyway. So
yeah, I have to agree. This is the Sony equivalent that I like is this is the 55 Zeiss, which is a very nice piece of kit. It's one of my oldest lenses, actually. It's one of the original lenses that Sony released way back in the day, and it's still going very strong, extremely sharp. Yeah, as a little kit like that, yeah, it's pretty hard to beat a good nifty 50, especially if it's nice and sharp and does the job. In terms of your 24-105, this is one that I've been using a lot lately, and it doesn't look like a very big lens, or it doesn't have a big zoom range, but it actually does 20-70. So it's a bit of an unusual start. Normally, it's a 24-70, but I've found that having the 20mm on the wide end has been amazing. Like 20 is actually one of my favorite focal lengths. Probably my favorite wide angle prime is actually this 20 f1.8. And so to have 20mm in the zoom, I've actually started using this more than my 24-105, because you can always crop in, but it's very hard to crop out. Obviously, you'd have to do a pano to make something fit, and I shoot a lot wider than I do tighter. So I've been finding this 20-70 quite useful. I've also seen Tamron and a few other manufacturers now starting to release some much more interesting focal length ranges similar to that. It's nice that there's some of these non-standard focal length ranges coming through that are actually meaning that you can now, I guess, maybe you stop using other lenses, or having more versatile lenses in your bag that you may not have considered, which has been quite nice. I generally find 24 just that little bit tight, just sometimes it's just not quite wide enough.
Yeah, I know. Look, one of your favorite go-tos is your 12 to 24, which I've been standing next to and quite jealous of a lot of the time. To be perfectly honest, big monster lens that was expensive, but
Yeah, it's an absolute monster though. I mean, this is the size of it here. So, and huge big front element on it as well. So, it's you're not going to miss having this in your kit. Although, it's surprisingly light for what it can actually do. I think it's about 750 grams. But yes, it's basically a prime lens at all focal lengths. Really, it's that's sharp. And be able to use it for astro and all sorts of things. For me, that's definitely my lens that I couldn't go anywhere without. It would mean that I'm pretty far back from a lot of the shots though, so that's the trade-off.
I think
But I
that
am finding the 24-105 combined with the 20 to 70, just those two lenses are covering a vast proportion of the shots that I'd like to take. So that's been quite nice.
I mean, it's a little bit about specializations as well with the lenses. So I invested in a lens specifically purely for astro, and it's a 14mm 1.8 Sigma lens, and I got it for a bit of a steal. And there's another conversation here around new versus secondhand. So if I'm going to invest in a really good, mirrorless body, I want somebody to back me on that, because if things go wrong, you're talking huge money, and I'd be more wary buying something like that secondhand. Whereas a really well-made lens, they're often quite robust, and some of my lenses might be 20 years old now, and they still work wonderfully well, and they've had a bit of a life. So I'd be more openly inclined to looking around secondhand for lenses than I would DSLR or mirrorless bodies. I mean, if you know the people and it's still under warranty, and it's transferable to your name, fair enough. But just I don't know if you feel the same, Lukey. Like, I'm pretty wary about bodies, but I'm more open-minded about lenses in terms of. And
Yeah, I definitely think that that's the case. I would say though that I don't know, like if your main camera body, I'd probably buy a second-hand camera body. If they were saying they barely used it, their shutter count's low, it looks like it's been in pretty good condition. You look in there and the sensor's looking pretty clean, and you can generally tell straight away if a camera's had a hard life or not. And generally speaking, that's probably not so bad. So I don't know. I'd be willing to if the price was right and it looked like it had very low usage, I might consider a second-hand camera body if it wasn't my main camera. And then in terms of lenses, I'm almost a little bit the other way. Like with lenses, the thing is that if you get it and then you shoot with it for a little bit and then realize, oh, it's a little bit soft or there's a problem here, you kind of got nowhere to go. And if you try to send it in to get it fixed, then getting lenses fixed is very hard and very expensive. So at least if you're not happy with the performance and you buy it brand new, you could sort of take it back and say, hey, look, I'm really not happy with the performance of this lens, and that probably would do something about it. So, I'm sorry to maybe be a devil's advocate there, Paul, but I don't know. I'm in two minds about that one. I generally do buy brand new, but I'm lucky to have support from Sony when I do that. But I would say that, like you say, if it's someone and again, if it's low usage and they can show the receipts and things like that, then that might make you feel a little bit more comfortable too. But I mean, I hate buying equipment, anything secondhand, really. It's always a bit of a luck of the draw, and you have to use your own spidey senses, I suppose, at the time to work out what is.
It's probably this. You can argue about that with just about anything in the world. If you've got the money, there's a lot of advantage to buying new. But in terms of reaching out, and if you want to try something new and you're not sure if you're going to get into portrait, going to get into astro, then it might be worthwhile trying a lens out that isn't a big investment up front, that's secondhand, just to ease your way into it before you invest in something better. And like Canon in particular has probably the biggest secondhand market in the world of lenses, because all their older lenses are still compatible with the newer cameras, essentially, particularly through
but also you have to buy Canon. You have to buy Canon lenses. I mean, you can't buy a Tamron Canon lens, can you, these days? Or like they've really limited all of the
I haven't actually looked. I've had a lot of Canon. I've had a lot of Tamrons. I've had a lot of Takinas. I've had
on the RF system,
but I haven't sort of looked at how that's changed in the last few years since mirrorless has come in. I certainly did that with the SLRs, so I don't know. Like, I'm using my Sigma on my Canon mirrorless, and that works beautifully. So That's a good question, actually, Luke. I don't know how wide
Yeah, I'm really hoping that Canon open it up for Canon shooters so that there's more third-party lenses available in the RF mount system. I saw in the chat there that that Canon may be announcing a 24-105 2.8 on Friday morning, but might be over 4,500 Australian. And
just announced.
that's the sort of
I just
the
announced.
price point of those RFs is pretty
Yeah,
eye-watering
I
sometimes.
mean, that was one of the first things that struck me when they came out. I was like, oh, they're going to be lighter and they're going to be, maybe on par. And I was like, well, wait a minute. Some of these lenses are bigger and heavier and more expensive than the EF equivalent. And I was like, what?
Yeah, that
It's not
was it the
consistent.
20
So
was it the 28 to 72.8 or something or
yeah, that's a
F2? It was
monster.
an
Yeah, 28
F2 lens.
70. It's a straight F2 all the way through. But also, it's the other way around. So the 7200 equivalent on the RF is half the weight and two-thirds of the size, and the 100 to 500 is a lot lighter and smaller than the equivalent 100 to 400 sort of, otherwise. So it depends a little bit on what lens you get. The super, super really big, wide open, like straight F2 lenses are always going to be big lenses. Whereas the equivalents that done, replacement 7200 to 8 and that kind of thing are a lot lighter and smaller. So, this little 50 mil is, I could sneeze and blow it off my desk. So it's sort of generally, I would say the RF lenses are lighter and smaller, and there's just a couple of exceptions with Canon. They've just
I've been
released.
stoked with what Sony's been able to do with theirs. Like that's the 21.8. Just some of them are like super pocketable little lenses, and every time they bring out a new version, it's quite a bit smaller. Like this is the 16 to 35 Mark 1, and the Mark 2 I think was 20 odd percent smaller than this, and lighter. So they not only will improve the image quality, but also somehow magically make it smaller and lighter as well, which is very, very appreciated by all that have just invested in the prior lens and now feel completely obsolete straight away.
Yeah, there's a
Do you have
new.
a lens that like
I just update people. There's a new 10 to 20 F4 that's just been announced, IS version, which
oh, that does look pretty nice.
yeah, which is going to be quite a versatile range. I'm actually considering that one. But again, it's $4,000 or something.
Oh,
But it's
and not having the 2.8 is a bit of a tough one. Yeah.
if you're an astro shooter, yeah, like it's sort of like I wouldn't have blinked in a pure general landscape sort of day because I'm usually stopping it down, not opening it up. It's more for super super kind of low light sort of circumstances. Yeah, I mean that's the other consideration. I think there's this kind of line where f4, f2.8 in terms of a landscape lens that's capable of also being an astro or a low light photography lens. There is usually quite a big difference when you jump from an f4 lens to a 2.8 and wider open. So, and it's quite noticeable. And Luke would know more than anyone because the amount of clients he's dealt with out in the field running astro workshops with people that only have f4s are bigger as opposed to 2.8s are lower. I wouldn't say it's chalk and cheese, but it's really quite significant. So if you are
It's
really
yeah, if
getting
you're doing anything in low light and night photography and you're not you're shooting at f4, it's and often you'll sometimes you come across folks with a kit lens, so like f4.5 to 5.6 on a crop camera, and you're having to really make some magic just to be able to even see a star to get it into focus with that sort of scenario. So I always remark on the fact that the people starting out that don't have that gear that's better for low light, it's already hard to start learning it. But then also on top of that, if you're having equipment that doesn't help with that, then you're actually doubling how hard it is to start with. So there's very few kind of genres where I guess the gear can be critically important like that, but definitely in low light it is, and that's why it's nice to have a camera that can do that. I do have another lens that I've been using, which is the Laowa 9mm. So I'm familiar with how incredibly wide something around 9 or 10 mil actually is. And 10, for me, 10's almost too wide. If you're holding up the camera and pointing it out that way, and you can see your feet, then it's pretty wide. But there's definitely scenarios where it's super handy to have that sort of width.
I know you shoot 12 all the time, like
The
as
12's, yeah. So 12's pretty nice, but even like the wider you're going, it's like it's not a linear thing. So actually, for every mil that you're going out wider, it's a considerable amount of extra field of view that you're actually gaining. And so the difference between 9 and 12 is a huge proportion of the actual field of view. And so that 10 to, what was it, 10 to 18 is going to be quite an interesting lens. And yeah, it definitely will be more of a niche thing, but there's no doubt you'll be able to create some quite unique imagery with a setup like that. And I certainly can understand that. But I have to admit, I don't really use that 9mm that much anymore, mainly because it's just such a kind of a niche kind of scenario. And I generally find that 12 is enough for me. Sometimes 12 is probably a bit too wide, but I think you remember when we went to King Island and I took my 16 to 35 rather than the 12 to 24, and probably got sick of me saying how much I missed the 12 to 24. So
should have bought a 12-pack of beer with that choice.
The one that I was really surprised about when I bought is this, which is the it's actually 135mm, and look at the hunk of glass in the front of that thing.
Look at the glass on that.
And so this thing I actually originally bought for astrophotography, but I've just been really enjoying using it as a creative tool for different depth of fields and portraiture and playing around a little bit. So I'd say that this would be my sort of pick for a lens that wouldn't be a lens you'd expect me to have, but really thoroughly enjoy using. I don't know. Have you got a lens like that?
Canon has the same one. They have a 135 f2, and it's one of those kind of sweet spot lenses that it's been around for a while. There's quite a few on the secondhand market for like $900, $1,000, and probably in their day though it was like a $2,000 or $3,000 lens. So there's a few lenses floating around. There tend to be quite a few around that are a bit specialist, and that's kind of what I meant. Where I probably wouldn't buy that one new, but I might be willing to find a copy that's secondhand to give it a go, because it is quite a specialized niche kind of focal length. But I've seen some of the results from Lukey's 135 on projects that we were sort of shooting in parallel. We did some video work for a wonderful project and stills, and I when I looked at what he was getting at, I really opened my eyes to the potential of that focal range that I never would have normally gone near myself. So yeah, it's a good being open-minded.
There's something nice about having that larger working distance when you can get that beautiful compression depth of field and have a longer working distance and be further away from your subject and still have some nice subject separation as well. So, but it is a main reason, a lot of, if you're doing any tracked deep space astrophotography, the 135 1.8 is actually really great. So that's when you're doing astrophotography without any landscape in it. It's just only looking at the sky. Obviously, having a focal length of 135 and aperture of 1.8 is really advantageous. But there's a cheaper Samyang lens you can get, the Samyang 135 1.8 as well. It's not autofocus though, but that's another great lens to try out when it comes to that as well. So, but I'd say that's that's been a bit of a surprise for me, and I thought I'd probably sell it soon after getting it, but I find that if I'm trying to do a portrait or something like that, the results I get with it are just always something I like. But of course, every now and then the frame's just filled with someone's face, and you're like, okay, this is definitely not the right lens for the choice for this job. So it's not always.
The beauty of investing in something secondhand that's a reasonable quality, if you get a reasonable buy, is you can try it for a while and probably sell it and lose very little. Because it's already secondhand, it's not gonna have the drop from new to secondhand that you get otherwise. So there's a bit more freedom, I find, in trying out specialty lenses in particular. If you just shop around, where do you kind of? I mean, you're saying you probably don't need to now with Sony, but I tend to try. There's specific Facebook groups, like I know there's this really specific Canon buy and sell group where everybody on there is really on top of anyone being a scammer or they have really consistent protocols around it. And I've got a number of things off there I've been pretty comfortable with, for instance, secondhand. I don't know where else you'd suggest people shop around.
I think marketplaces. I think Gumtree is probably the one that's always has gone a bit on the dodgy side of things. I find marketplace isn't too bad because someone has to put their name to it, but obviously you're always having to be very wary of scams and things like that. I mean, the best thing I think to do is just shop around for a good price. Like we've got Black Friday sales coming up pretty soon, or towards the back end of November. So waiting for those sort of times when you have sales, you'll often find if something goes really on a good sale, it's very similar price to what the secondhand price is anyway. So I think timing and waiting for those right times is a good one. With Sony as well, you can go in the Sony store and price match things, which can be handy as well. If you find a good price, often the store themselves will match that. Or I think often DigiDirect and George's and Camera House and some of those other retailers will be doing sales here and there, so it might just be worth waiting for timing on those sort of things. That's certainly what I did in the past before when I had to buy my own equipment. Well, I still buy all of my own equipment, of course, but when I didn't have better rates and things like that, so that certainly made a big difference.
I'm wondering what a lens is kind of roughly worth. Like often I'll go to DigiDirect as like a standardization price point. Like their prices are quite consistent because they have such big buying power. They're probably on the bottom end or the more effective value for money end of what's available new. So it's quite a good benchmark to get an idea.
It is. You just have to be.
Yeah.
You have to be super careful with Digi that they actually have it in stock. So they won't actually list on their website if they actually have the product. So I don't know if that's changed or not, but I got stung once when I bought something and then it ended up being a 6-week wait or something, and I could have purchased it elsewhere at a similar price. So it's worth just messaging them and actually checking if it is actually in stock before you purchase. That may have changed.
I had the same experience. I literally ring up and ask, and if you ring up and get a person, they'll look and they'll actually tell you where.
Yeah, that's
online.
Most of the other things sites, they'll have a stock listing, but that's just the one thing to look out for. Although I guess on a sale, you've got to be careful because there's so much thing it could they're probably walking out the door quickly, and so it sort of works that way. But yes, it's definitely I mean, in terms of selling, I've always sold the most things straight from my Facebook profile and just said, hey, I'm selling all this stuff, and I normally will always sell something that way, and I feel like that's the most genuine way, and probably to pick something up as well if people are just posting on their profile and selling a few things, so that can also be another way. Yeah. So, and if you're shooting Sony, try and get along to a touch and try event as well. That's a really good way to actually be able to test the lenses, understand if that's actually something you'd like to use. Obviously, you can do that in a camera shop too, although nothing beats actually being out in the field and the shooting scenario where you can actually use use it in its full fury, I suppose. So that's always nice to be able to do as well. I'm hoping to do one actually down here in Tassie in early December. So I'm looking forward to that.
A lot of the bigger brands have systems where, like Nikon has it. Canon equivalent is called CPS, where you pay like a fee. I think it's $75 a year, and then you get access to, I think, 3 free sensor cleans a year, and you can literally order and try out just about any lens you possibly want as a free trial for a period of time. So if you want to try before you buy, I don't know if Sony's got something similar, I assume, but
I'm actually just in the process of sending a couple pieces of kit away for a check and clean, and we get I think 3 free cleans and checks a year, which I think actually also roll over. I think it's about $100 a year, and you have to have, I think, 2 alpha bodies and maybe 3 G or series lenses or more to qualify for it. But it's not a huge barrier. I guess it's still a relatively expensive amount of equipment to qualify, but it is definitely worth trying to qualify to be able to have some of those benefits and also rapid repairs and discounted repairs as well.
And usually, so very, very similar to Canon and Lucky. So they have rapid repairs, and they usually have a 20% discount on the labor for repairs as well. But it's sort of brilliant. Like I've loaned gear quite a few times, and sometimes I've been lucky enough on for longer, more international trips as well. When you're responsible for the lens, so on those trips I've actually taken insurance out specifically for those lenses just in case. Like I took some to Iceland and Svalbard, for instance, which was really wonderful. And occasionally, if I need a spare body for a job and I want to take another R5 as opposed to one of my Mark IIIs or something, which I also did on that last trip. So it's sort of, there is a buy-in, like you do. Canon is very similar. You need 2 sort of 5D bodies and 3 L series lenses to qualify. But once you're there, like you could sell them all later on, and they probably wouldn't know. It's kind of like, but it is an entry point. But I think as a professional or somebody that's consistently invested in a certain brand, it opens up a lot of possibilities to try things out, and particularly professionally, like having a gear turned around quickly is really quite significant.
Yeah, and I think we've got a similar turnaround. I think they said that if I post it via Star Trek, and they would receive it within a day or two from Tassie, and then it'd be 2 or 3 days, and then they'd post it back. So you could, in theory, have it within one full business week, I suppose. If Star Trek actually would turn up and pick up the package, that's always half the battle in places like Tassie. But anyhow,
Yeah.
that's all part of the fun. But yeah, so the bodies that you're shooting on, you got an R5, that's the main body you're working with?
I don't know, five. So there's another sort of commentary about the brand. So Canon is quite famous for having a 4-year turnaround before they upgrade their major bodies, which is kind of like, oh, I think Sony's more like 2 years, is it? Or
Yeah, Sony seems to be on about a 2-year cycle, which you could argue is just as annoying, because by the time you've actually bought it and gotten used to it, then the next one came out. I mean, I got the A7 III, A7R3. I love that camera, and then I was almost annoyed when the A7R4 came out within about 18 months or something, because I was like, well, I'm really super happy with the A7R3. So why did you dump this new camera that I have to
Mate,
buy now?
you don't often make me feel better, Lucky, about gear, but you just did. So thank you.
Oh no, I think about it way too much. But now that I'm on the A7R5, I mean, every camera I say is the last camera I ever need, but the A7R5 is definitely right there in terms of having those additional features that I've always wanted, especially the inbuilt focus stacking or in-camera focus stacking, and the bulb timer. And a few other little features as well that just make the usability on another level. So it's now starting to very much get to the point where the wish list is diminishing to a more manageable level, which is quite nice. And I'm assuming that I'll find something else to pick on. But I have to say, the rear screen of the A7R5 and how it can flip out like a standard Sony tilt screen, but then also you can also flip it out this way and then rotate this around. I mean, the flexibility of being able to do that is pretty incredible. And so being able to shoot landscape portrait, you don't have to worry about an L bracket because it clears the L bracket anyway. From that perspective, that rear screen alone means I've got an A7 IV, and I just find it so hard to use that flip out screen, and then it hits the L bracket and it drives me crazy. So that rear screen, I think it's still the only camera that Sony have that actually has that designed screen. When they released the A6700, I was bitterly disappointed that they didn't choose to put the new articulating screen design from the A7R5 into that. So hopefully with the rumored A7S4 and the next A7 Mark V, they'll all have that new type of screen in it, because the usability of it's just it's perfect, really. I've just knocked that out of the park.
Yeah, I spent quite a few years listening to Luke's upsetness around not having the focus stacking, in particular when it came out in the R5, because it's one of those things where it's a small feature, but if you really want to get into that kind of photography, it's a huge difference in your workflow and the feasibility to be able to shoot like up to 100 focus stack images in like a second is like unheard of, and it's just like a machine gun, and it's just
I mean, the argument was always you can do it manually, or it's not too hard to do it, but the point is you'd miss a frame, or there'd be some sort of factor to it. I mean, I could actually program a custom button that I can hold in and then press the shutter button, and by pushing in that toggle button in when I press the shutter button, and I've got it set so it does a focus stack, so I can do those sort of automated kind of gestures, as well as doing exposure bracketing. Unfortunately, it doesn't do like a exposure bracketed focus stack, although you can imagine how many frames that would be. But it's definitely amazing to have. The bulb timer for me is also a game changer, because there was no other real way to, apart from maybe using your phone, to actually do a long exposure past 30 seconds. But there's certain things that I've always on my wish list, like having built into the camera shutter speeds longer than 30 seconds, like having a minute, 2 minutes, up to maybe even 10. I mean, I'd be happy with up to 15 minutes without having to even need to use a bulb timer, because generally speaking, if you're doing a long exposure, for every minute you're adding on, it's not making a ginormous difference to the overall exposure like it is in the shorter exposures. So I would love to be able to just dial that in straight away without having to use a a bob timer mode, but you've got to have small steps with these things, I suppose.
Look, yeah, I was saying it's 9 o'clock already. I think you have two things. What do you want to use the last half an hour for? Because we've kind of only got through cameras and lenses.
Yeah, well, I think we've done a pretty good job
If I
of
did,
covering
I
off
just
the cameras and lenses that we use. So I
Yeah, if I
thought
just
we
finish
could
the, I was going to open it. I was going to say, why don't we also, for the people who are listening, if there's any, the people that are giving us feedback on the show live, you've got a special opportunity to maybe put your hand up for something as well. I'm certainly open to. But I was trying to think, Lukey, if we focus more on maybe last half of the kind of things that really have changed, or maybe that are really new, or are coming up in the future.
Yeah, I think so. And I'd
If
also like
maybe
to show a
the
few
last one.
bits of kit that I really enjoy using as well, and feel like would really help people as well. But definitely, I mean, where do you see Canon going in terms of the range? I've seen, that there's rumors of it like an R1 coming out and things like that.
Yeah,
Is that
the
a
R1's a rumor at the moment. We don't really know what the resolution is going to be. If you weren't familiar with the Canon system, basically the smaller the number, the more higher in the range. So the one is number one. So there hasn't been an R1 yet. There's been a DSLR equivalent of one for a long period of time. And that's been the battle axe. That's been the heavy, solid, massively weather resistant, kind of unbreakable kind of body that a lot of documentary and sports photographers would use in particular. And then the sweet spot for both the bang for the buck and also the resolution has been the 5 kind of series. They put out an R3 about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, where they have an eye control focus system in it, which they actually used to have 15 years ago in my EOS 3, actually, my film body. And they must have sat on the patent of that for 15 years, so that's come back out. The new R5 Mark II is likely coming out in February next year. They're just about to release, or just announced, or their rumors are very, very strong about a 200 to 800 lens, actually, which is an RF kind of high end model. So that's quite an unusual range. I'm not aware of any other lens that I've come across in my life that's been 200 to 800. And that's going to be quite an interesting sort of lens with a lot of sort of diverse kind of applications, from all the way from landscape to obviously wildlife in particular. So I'd say, yeah, the 4-year cycle is sort of coming up with that. So it's quite likely. I'm guessing the R5 will be slightly high resolution. I'm a little bit curious about what they bring out, but it's kind of like you, Lucky. Like, I'm so happy with my R5. It's been the most versatile and incredibly functional camera for just about every genre I can possibly think of that I've ever used in my life. So I'm not sitting here pining for anything. I'm not sitting here waiting for anything particular to come out that's going to change the game or really change my photography. This camera has, I would say, it was a really, really big jump, particularly from the DSLRs and the Mark IIIs that I've been using. The functionality in low light, the speed of the autofocus, the tracking, the eye tracking, and the subject tracking in particular has been absolutely incredible, and I've lent on that so heavily. The low light capability of the focusing has been brilliant. The focus stacking, obviously the ability to look at your histogram before you even take a photograph, which is pretty much on most mirrorless cameras, has been a bit of a game changer. So there are a bunch of things that have actually made a really significant functional difference to my everyday use. So I'm kind of not sitting there going, oh my God, I'm waiting. I can't wait to get rid of this one. I want to move on. I feel like it is the best camera I've ever used so far. But I mean, you could say that about every single phone you use until the next one comes out as well. But I'm personally not waiting with bated breath, and that I really need to evolve. So I'm a little bit curious, and I do want a second body. So it'd be interesting when it comes out. If it's not significantly different from the current R5, I might look to get a second R5 as my second body instead. Because when you get a new model come out, that usually means the second hand market on what you've got goes down and make it a little bit more accessible. So that's a little bit of a clever way to shop around as well. I don't know, but Sony's got in the works.
Well, I think the rumor mill's suggesting an A9 Mark III, which would be sorely needed. Like a lot of the brand new or newer AI subject detect autofocus features aren't in some of those. Even the A1 flagship camera doesn't actually have the newer autofocus system. So it's really like A6700s and the A7R5 that have that. And so this A9 Mark III will be a real powerhouse also if they include, which I'm sure they will, those new subject detect autofocus type modes, which have a bit more AI technology to them. Like they can keep focusing on a particular subject, even if it turns around, it sort of understands that that's still a head and the head should still be in focus, even if it can't see the eyes, for example. So those, or if object's moving and something goes in front, it can, still has the idea that's still moving and keep tracking even though there's something that went in front. So having that capability will be pretty amazing for an A9 type camera where you've got, it's made for sport and speed. It's a over 20 frames per second camera. So that'll be amazing. And then I'm really interested to see what they do with the A7S Mark IV, which is also kind of due pretty soon. So that I'm really hoping that it has a lot of astrophotography features and maybe even a resolution bump up, even that may make it an absolute powerhouse of a low light astro camera. Although I'm absolutely super happy with the A7 Mark III and the A7 Mark IV, so I don't necessarily feel like I need that. But that would be pretty amazing, especially if they can adopt some very night photography centric features to the camera, which they may do, given that that you've now got the FX series of cameras, which is more skewed towards video. Traditionally, the A7 IV was very, very video centric, or A7S3 rather. So that means that maybe they need to pivot that line and focus on night. I'm hoping maybe they will focus on more night photography or low light stills rather than the video centric nature it did have. But we'll wait and see what that means. But for whatever, like I'm sort of in a boat like you now. I'm actually very happy with the stable of equipment that I have, and I don't necessarily feel like there's a few lenses and things I might jiggle around. I'd love to get that 70 to 200 I showed. I'd love to get a 200 to 600, which I feel like is a nice sort of competing lens to your 100 to 500. Maybe it's probably a little larger than that. But yeah, generally speaking, like the A7R5 is just such a home run now. It's hard to imagine there being a better camera. The A7 IV for me, the difference. Hey,
might be interesting to have that same conversation in a couple of years.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I mean, I'm sure that it does tend to be for me that every second release, there's one in between that didn't quite hit the mark, or at least, I mean, I think they all hit the mark. It's just, is there enough additional features to make it worth the jump? And that's very much the same with phones and things like that too. So you have to kind of evaluate, is there really enough additional benefit for me to warrant the upgrade? And I'm sort of feeling like it's going to have something pretty special in it for me to need to move to the next one. Well, having said that, given that there's a big advantage for me to use the latest cameras, because then I know them and I can talk about them, and that's probably what Sony would like me to be doing too. So I'm probably in a different situation there. But I do feel, for example, the difference between the A7 III and the A7 IV, at least for low light photography, wasn't like a cataclysmic difference. Although if you're approaching it more from a sort of autofocus handheld kind of shooting, then there's a massive difference in terms of the autofocus improvement. So it kind of just depends on what you're trying to achieve there. But generally speaking, if you're getting anything past the A7 III or A7R3 onwards in those cameras, that they're just fully capable, absolutely brilliant. And that'd be the same with like the A6600 onwards, when they switch to the larger NPFZ batteries. In terms of the APS-C cameras, it's in terms of Sony land, it's pretty hard to go wrong. Yeah, I hope that they might release. There was rumors of a 16mm f2 prime or something like that, or f1.8. So it'd be really nice to have a wider angle, very fast prime as well, that may be a little bit more affordable for people. At the moment, the 14 1.8 is quite expensive, so it'd be nice to have a wide angle prime that's a bit more affordable, and maybe also has a filter ring on it, whereas the 14 1.8 doesn't have a filter ring. So that would be quite nice. So there's a few like wish items, but it's with the amount that's around, I feel like now it's more about just finding the right tool for the job, and not having to get so worried about, there's a huge gap here, and that kind of thing. So I definitely feel pretty grateful for that.
I'm going to change
And
tack a little bit, look, because it's 10 past 9 already. In terms of things that I feel like that have come across in the market that have really changed the game, and I would say this little puppy here is one of them.
yeah,
This is the new Mavic Pro, or newish Mavic 3 Pro. So what is significantly different about this, you even notice, there are actually 3 different lenses in this camera, which, as far as I know, is not been accessible on a mainstream market for drones before. They normally ship with either a 22 or 24 mil wide single wide angle lens, and that's it. And there's no ability to change the focal length at all. So I just tested this out in Iceland and Svalbard, and I literally got one of the first in the country. It was a bit of a hassle to get it. They hadn't even arrived in Tasmania yet, but I managed to race out between flights on the way to the Middle East and grab one. And having the versatility to be able to shoot 70 mil and 166 mil is a very, very significant change in what's possible, both from a cinematic look and feel, but also in terms of, for instance, if you want to shoot wildlife, and there's specific rules about how close you can be. There's specific rules with people. You can't be within 100 feet of human beings and that kind of thing. And all of a sudden, with that level of compression, you could be a long, long, long way away from the subject matter and get a look and feel that feels like you're really intimate and close to the subject. So I'm not too much of a keep up with the Joneses sort of guy, but I pay attention when things make a really significant functional difference. And I think it's essentially the same body and the same wide lens as there is on the actual regular Mavic 3. Yeah, the Mavic 3 is a big jump from the 2 in terms of its physical range with the longer battery life. I really noticed that. I felt a lot more relaxed and comfortable being up there for longer and not having to race my shots as much. Luke and I sometimes go back and forth with the old Mavic 2 Pro, because they have the capacity to turn all the sensors off. And if you were trying to land on, Arctic boats like I was, with wires and yachts and things everywhere, it can be really super difficult and quite problematic when you've got a system that doesn't allow you to switch those things off. That's not the recommended approach, because obviously you've got to know what you're doing if you're going to switch off all the safeties. But there are times when that's the difference between having a drone land in your hand and having it land in the ocean, or wrap around a wire.
pretty big difference.
Pretty big difference. So that to me is a bit of a game changer in terms of the last maybe 6 months of what's changed in terms of what's out there and accessible in the world. And I'm really
pretty good.
If you want to
I had a bit of a think too about what are the key pieces of kit that I've started to use that have really changed the game for me. And I'd probably say like the number one change has been around filters, and has probably been the Revo ring system, and just being able to really consolidate my filters down into a larger or a smaller little package. So this is just my Nissi Caddy filter case, and I bought a Nissi long exposure kit. So it fits in a whole bunch of pretty much all my filters, and you can sort of see there I've also numbered, I've written in Texter, so I can just know straight away which particular filter it is that I'm looking for. But this Revo ring system, which I think I introduced you to as well, Paul, has been amazing, because you can just buy one set of 82 mil filters, screw them on the end. But the killer thing about it is it's got this aperture ring in the back here, which basically goes in and then can clip onto your lens. So here's the my 20 to 70. I can just pop that on there like that, let go, and then now that's rock solid, and I can actually even hold the lens up quite comfortably using that particular adapter. And then to take it off, you just pinch, twist, and then it comes off again. So to be able to put on a filter like that so easily, I'm using them, not surprisingly, a whole lot more. And so I really love long exposures, but I would always either find it painful to get out a big kit and all of the additional things that are associated with that. So to just have a series of 82 mil filters and be able to put it on most of my lenses, with one big notable exception being my 12 to 24, which has a ginormous filter on it, has been amazing. But another one that's been really great has been this kit, which is I think it's a Hyder brand, and so I've actually got my long exposure sort of calculation table on the top. But what's actually inside is a whole bunch of very, very small filters in there, and so these filters actually sit in the back of my 12 to 24 lens, and so they're actually rear filters. And so rather than having to have a huge big dinner plate set of lenses, filters for the lens, I've got a 60-gram little box here that's got 10 stop, 6 stop, and 3 stop, I think, as well in it. Plus, I've also got a light pollution filter, and so that's been really amazing to be able to use long exposures. I really dearly wish they had a 15 stop filter, mind you, but they don't. So that's been nice. And I still have to have a polarizer for the front. I can't really get around that, which is a bit annoying. But and then also always a very good idea to label your equipment, and put the that's it's going to overexpose on me. That's nice, but basically have a label everything you have with a label maker so that if you lose it, you still get it back. I just put a label on there, very simple label. It just has my email address on there. So, unfortunately, I didn't label my tripod recently that got lost. And so it's no surprise it hasn't come back. But here's another example here, just at the bottom of this one, just with my email on there, just so that, whose it is. It keeps the honest people honest, I suppose. They know who to return it to. No one can switch it on you, and you end up with a different, someone else's copy of that lens or what have you. So same thing with batteries, and this is my case that I have all of my batteries and all of my SD cards, which I highly recommend, by the way. You can see I've got my 2 batteries there, plus all of my SD cards, and so that's been really great. You might even see there that I've labeled the SD cards as well, so I know which SD card is which, and they're identifiable, and I can say I've backed up this one when I name a folder on my laptop after that SD card, so I can copy the whole contents of that SD card, and I know which SD card it actually was because it's actually labeled correctly. So that's always a very good idea too. But those sort of pieces of kit, even though they're very simple and basic, can make a massive difference in terms of what you're able to do out in the field and how you can shoot. And I think they're probably the key things for me that's been making a big difference.
Yeah, Luke introduced me to the Revo Ring, and I think I was always very unimpressed with the whole filter systems with all the bracketing and different large pieces in front of each other. It was very slow, it's very dicky, it's very easy to break, very hard to keep them clean. And as a result, I hardly ever used them, even though I did have that system for quite a long time. And the trick is to, like Luke said, pick your largest regularly used lens and buy the filter kit that's wide enough to screw into that. In my case, it's also 82 mil, because most of my lenses beyond that are 77 or 67 or down to 58. And you could use that same filter then on all of those other lenses as well through the Revo Rig system. And it's so quick, so easy. It's just instant. And you'll find that you'll lead into the creative potential that you can get from long exposures a lot more than you ever did before. That's certainly been the case for me. That's been a bit of a game changer in terms of my regular, everyday kind of creative practices. Something unusual that's changed the game for me a little bit is I actually bought an electric mountain bike. And I live right on the slopes of Mount Wellington, and that beautiful mountain gets snow on it quite regularly. Not as much this winter, but it certainly has over the last 25 years. And they are like religiously Nazis in terms of closing the road, and it's physically impossible to get up there and shoot it unless you want to get up at 2:30 in the morning and walk 5 hours in the snow past all the gates to be able to shoot. And now I can literally just zoom straight past the gate of an electric mountain bike, go where the hell I want. And so I feel a lot of freedom. There's also a lot of trails and places that if you don't have a really high and forward drive, you can really, really easily get a mountain bike through. And there's places on the West Coast where I've got a range of 80, 90 kilometers on this thing, and I can do longer if I have a second battery. And I can carry quite a lot on my back as well, quite comfortably, because the suspension's so good. So quite unusual.
How much does the battery weigh, the second battery?
Or I don't know how much it weighs. It's probably a couple of kilos. It's not super light. There are some bikes where you can actually clip the second battery into the bike itself and have it there as one to the other. Cool. You can have like a larger range. So also, I've even used it I literally ride it to photo shoots, like commercial shoots, because I'm like, I don't have the parking hassles, and if I've got the gear, I can fit it all in one of my low pro bags. And sorry, I may have stopped bag. I just got a secondhand f-stop Talopa, and Lukey was the first one. I think I've had one of Lukey's secondhand ones for years, and I love it. And I think that's a bit of a sweet spot, finding the right bag and knowing that you can get pretty much everything you need in it, that it's going to be fairly waterproof, that the accessibility of being able to like not have to put the bag on the ground, like literally just swing it around your waist and pull things in and out, because there are places and shoots that I'm on where I don't want to be putting my stuff on the ground. And I remember doing that once on big event shoots, and next thing you know, and my bag's not there anymore, and somebody's literally stolen it within like 30 seconds. And so it's kind of, there are advantages both mentally, physically, and security wise to be able to have a system that you don't need to take off you. And also just knowing your stuff's protected, like particularly in the Zodiacs and the Arctic and places like that, where one big wave could come over and be the end of your gear, and knowing you've got something that's kind of durable enough to handle the weather and also comfortable enough to wear on longer trips. Like I've seen Luke stack up his f-stop bags and literally just use that as everything and put everything in the one bag. A slightly bigger version, albeit, but that's a bit of a game changer. The other thing I use,
you could get away with a larger size f-stop for an overnight hike. I still wouldn't recommend a camera backpack for a multi-day trip. I feel like they might market them as being suitable for a multi-day, but I don't think there's any camera bags that are really at that level. And plus, you generally don't take so much camera gear on a large multi-day trip because you've got to carry so much food and other things anyway. So it sort of changes the scenario a little bit. But yeah, definitely. I am an f-stop ambassador, but yeah, the f-stop Ajna is probably a really good starting point if you're looking at getting into those sort of bags. I spelled AJNA, or the Talopa is the larger size, which is also really great. Very comfortable packs that you can use.
The other thing I surprisingly use a lot of is this little guy. This is one of the Osmo kind of OM type phone gimbals. And I just find if you have a little stand on it, so you can literally set it up so it can literally track things and track movements. I sometimes, if I just want an extra thing to add a bit of a storytelling behind the scenes stuff in terms of like setting up a time lapse and just leaving it, if I don't have a second camera, for instance, or talking to the camera can actually track you and move around and set the scene really well. The stabilization on it is brilliant. You can kind of extend the head on these as well if you want to get a little bit crazy in terms of your selfie style sort of elements of things. It's quite stable. And with the improvements in video technology and the smartphones these days, I'm shooting 4K 60 frames a second just about all the time. And if I'm already shooting at 16:9, which is what most video formats can end up in anyway, I find it quite seamless to blend in. And the beauty of the video and these kind of and phone cameras in particular is the HDR technology is brilliant. Whereas I've got a Ronin kind of system for the R5, and yes, it's probably a more professional setup to use, but all the limitations of having to carry around, all your ND filters and also the limitations of shifting with the light exposure changes a lot. You pretty much had a wall where once it, whereas phone cameras are brilliant at seamlessly moving between high contrast places or lower light and higher light. And so for behind the scenes stuff and kind of storytelling narratives for the videos I've done on the projects the aerial projects in the last few years, even some commercial work that I do for the internals of houses and some of the documentary work that I do telling stories, it's actually quite amazing. And Luke would know as much as anyone the capability of phones now across a broader sort of spread. Like most things, I usually don't bother upgrading a camera in particular or one of these until there's a couple of models out. You can get these secondhand for like $100, $120. I will tell you, this is the OM6, which is the latest one, and it has the extendable head. The OM5, which is the one before, I didn't like as much because the battery power was about, maybe less than half of this. So I don't know why. They had a really good battery in the OM4 and they had a really crappy battery in the OM5, and then went back to having a good battery in the OM6. So I do think it's the kind of thing you could, if you just want to try out and get one secondhand for $100 or so, it's worthwhile. And this one was $239, I think, new. And quite surprisingly, for a lot of the professional work I was doing, that's all they needed. And I was doing shoots the other day for a commercial client, and they needed like instant turnaround on images. So they needed images literally within 2 minutes. And I've actually just invested in the new 15 sort of Pro Max. And I literally was sending images through instantly to clients that they were more than happy to use on social media, like instantly. So because
the phones these days are outrageous. Like this is I'm a Samsung guy, so this is the S23 Ultra. I'll just have to share. This is a Aurora shot that I took with the S23 Ultra just to give you an idea. So this is taken just down the road from where I used to live, and yeah, just it's actually a 50 megapixel file, raw file, and you know, the low light performance and the astro performance of them. I mean, you probably wouldn't want to look at it one to one or zoom right in, but the point being that the ability these days to, you know, and what you can actually achieve with phones is it's definitely a serious sort of secondary device to have. And I actually really enjoy using a phone as well just to frame up a shot. Sometimes it's a bit annoying to get your big camera out, and if you're not sure if it's a shot that's worthwhile, so you can get your phone out, take the shot. You know, if the shot looks pretty nice on your phone, hopefully it looks as nice on your camera. Sometimes it's like, oh, how come it looks so good on the phone and not on the camera? I don't understand. But yeah, so it is pretty amazing to see where it's going. I don't know if it's going to replace it, but it's definitely nice to have it as a second device or an additional device at your disposal that you can use for video and stills and supplementary footage that still might be quite nice. I certainly agree with Paul. And, you know, if clients are just looking at using the shots for social or online use, then a phone photo is still more than acceptable. It's more about the content and what it's saying, and did it hit the mark rather than what the device actually is.
Yeah, like it's amazing. Like the technology on the new 15 Pro Max is such that if you put it in portrait mode, you can retrospectively completely change the aperture and depth of field to anything you want after you take the photograph. So, and you can even change where the focal point of which person it's even on. So it's kind of like it just tone maps the entire image front to back, and then you can kind of decide retrospectively. And I believe that you can do that in the video as well. So, I mean, phones have worked pretty hard of late to kind of reiterate and try and get that depth of field kind of effect, because that's been one of the bigger, most significant differences between phones and more higher end sort of cameras with really wide open apertures. That's been a distinction point for a long time, one to the other, and they really worked pretty hard to use their algorithms and technology to bridge the gap between the two. So I wouldn't say one's better than the other than that, but it's yeah, I was resistant to phones for a long time, and I didn't even use Instagram for years, which I really pissed off at now, because I never got to build up my account, because I was like, I don't want to be looking at images at square on this tiny little screen. But I've since realized they are actually very functional professional tools now in a lot of different circumstances. And yeah, I do that quite a lot now, Lucky, too. I walk around with my phone to actually practice and compose shots before, particularly if I'm waiting for the light to come right, and I'll just use it to visualize as a tool, and I find that really functional.
Yeah, that's right. It can be like an inspiration generator. Like you see the nice way it looks on the phone, and it's enough for you to kind of reach for the larger camera. I do find though that it can go the other way, and you subconsciously sort of feel like you've already got the shot because you've taken it on your phone, and then later realize, oh no, I didn't actually put as much effort into getting it with my main camera because I'd shot it on the phone and felt like I'd already done it justice. So there is a trade-off to that. I've actually used to do a lot of stories on Instagram and all sorts of things like that. I've tried to pare that back and just try and use the phone purely as a tool just to capture shots that I would like to then emulate on my wide angle. And what I really do like is the wide angle, the ultra wide lens on the S23 Ultra is about the equivalent of 12 millimeters. So if I take a shot with the 0.6 times lens, then I can sort of infer that that's how it would also look. So it's actually really handy to understand what the full frame equivalent field of view is for your phone cameras, and you know there's often different ones in there now too. So you know, is your 1 times a 20 mil lens, or is your 3 times a 50 mil lens? And so that, by just knowing that, means that you can use your lenses in your camera to help facilitate the choice of lens that you can actually then use on your main camera. So that's another nice tip to look into what that actually is. I don't even know a good website to do that. You could probably ask Google or ChatGPT or something like that, and you'd be able to get an answer on that. But it's definitely handy to know that, and certainly knowing that I think it also was that the 1 times is the equivalent of 24 mil for which is also a very useful focal length. So just really helpful as a guide there.
Yeah, the iPhone is 13 mil, then 24 mil, and I think it's close to 50 or 70, I think. So they've actually just introduced a full 5 times optical on the new iPhone, which is something they haven't done. iPhone's a bit of a funny brand in that they haven't really kept up with, say, like Samsung in particular, in terms of their megapixel capacity, particularly for a long time, or the optical focal lengths that they can do. But they're sort of catching up a little bit now with this one. What I like about this one in particular is you can actually do like full 48 megapixel RAW photographs, and you can actually do like full ProRes video RAW as well. And you can set it up so you can actually record that to external devices. So it's becoming a slightly more functional kind of video based sort of work. And I actually find I have used a lot of video kind of B-roll in particular, and a lot of the documentary work that I've done, and the small sort of mini films that I've done in the last sort of 3-4 years in particular. And it's filled in a lot more seamlessly than I thought it would be. It's less distinguishable than it used to be in terms of the caliber difference that you get, and just the speed and functionality of producing video output on phones I find it really amazing. Like some of the, like an exhibition opening, I might shoot 50 different video clips, and by the next morning I just plug it into like a light cutout or something on the phone that uses a little bit of AI to trim down and get some of the peak aspects of the clips, and pick the music and just tweak things here and there, and bang, I've got a video. Whereas if I did that whole process through my mirrorless, it would be hours and hours of farting around and work. So, and if the output is just for social media, you can argue that it's not actually necessary. And production stuff's different. Television, film is different again. Like for all the video work that I did in the Arctic and Iceland, I did it all on D-Log and the kind of the really raw kind of files that are going to take a lot of work to get up to speed. But I knew that it was rare and unusual to have access to those kind of places, and it was a lot of hassle to get all the permits, particularly for the Arctic. And so I thought if I ever wanted to be in a position to be able to sell some of that commercially, I was better off sort of taking a hit for the extra time it's going to be to process it to have the more high caliber content.
Yeah, it is interesting to even, getting to the point where we can talk about phones as a legitimate tool anyway, and some of the, I guess, even when you're thinking about a drone, we think about drone cameras as being totally fine, and they're essentially kind of like a mobile phone camera anyway. So it's just more maybe a stigma that we have against a phone from that respect. And so maybe that's very gradually changing. I did bump into someone the other day, and they were out taking photos at night, and they were asking me what I shot with, and they sounded shocked that I wasn't using my phone to take photos with. So it's starting to switch around the other way, I think. And my good friend Ben and I are admins on a group called Smartphone Astrophotography, and it's pretty amazing to see some of the images that are coming through in that group, and what can actually be done these days with some more of the you refer to them maybe in the past as rudimentary devices, but now the amount of computational imagery and additional processing that they can do, it's pretty remarkable what you can actually get out of them. So that's I don't know, do you ever see a day when a phone will replace it like entirely though, Paul?
I don't know. I don't think entirely for a while. I think for a lot of people in regular everyday life, it already has, and I see a lot of people not coming back. And it's affected the commercial world quite a lot. There are people that are happy, particularly with social media based and sort of storytelling and Instagram stories in particular, and TikTok in particular is probably a massive platform now. And I'd argue that probably 90% of the content on TikTok is shot on a phone, for instance. So, and a lot of, I don't know how much of Instagram stories, but probably a hell of a lot of it. So it's kind of, it's funny me saying this, because I was very much one of the very, very slow and very frustrated to even consider a phone as a tool. I felt like really frustrated when they came out, and really compromised, I think, in terms of the kind of output and outcomes that I was looking for myself personally, and even seeing it sort of started to take work away from me as a professional as well. I found quite frustrating. So like most things, you've got to pivot, you've got to adapt, you've got to evolve. And probably 3 years ago, I started looking at the functionality. I think I got a 13 Pro Max, and I literally bought it. It's the first new phone I think I've ever bought. and I bought it specifically as a commercial tool because one of the clients I work with was more than happy with the outcome for social media, which is what I was doing. It was my main job for 2 years, being from the phone and being 4K and being at 60p was all I needed. And so I just used that simple phone gimbal, and it made my workflow 3 times or 4 times faster and less problematic than I had, even though I had the Ronin, the R5, and I started actually relating to it as a professional output sort of tool. And then I started blending that into a lot of the projects I was doing, like the Altitude South project. A lot of the film making that I did from that inside the plane and behind the scenes was all shot on phones. And a lot of my social media stuff or behind the scenes or storytelling. It's like everything, Luke. If you just learn the strengths and weaknesses of what you are using and embrace them for what they are and make the most of being, on top of what they are capable of doing well, then it doesn't matter what camera you're using, you can just make decisions around its actual capabilities. So, they've already overtaken, they're the number one cameras in the world for more than a decade now already, probably maybe even 12 or 13 years now globally. If you ask people what the most popular cameras in the world are, that it's just been the case for a huge amount of time already. But yeah, I think there's still separation, particularly in a professional realm. I think in the video realm, there's quite a lot of crossover because most of the viewing of video work is on these, and you could almost argue the same for photographs. And the narrowness is shrinking a little bit in terms of their capability with print. Like I'm quite curious to now try a 48 megapixel file on this to see how it actually prints. I've never had above 12 before, so I'm a little bit curious to see if I would actually functionally consider that. And I'm literally after the show, I'm putting together some work for a project where they want to do 1 meter prints, and I'm kind of like, oh, I've got a few files on the 48, and I'm wondering if I could stretch it because I only have content for what they're after for a particular scene on that. So I'm going to do a few
I'm sure that some of the content that we've seen in places probably has been phone content, but people just haven't said that it is. I think it could easily pass under the radar these days, and people wouldn't necessarily call out that's a phone shot because of the stigma associated. But yeah, I'd be surprised if that's not already happening to a certain degree.
Oh, I think it already has been for a long time, and there's particularly with how clever their AI is in terms of upsizing now. And working with files, there's a lot more flexibility in terms of the source of files now and relative to the output than there was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And so in that regard, I'm a little bit more fluid in terms of where and how I use this. Sometimes I think, well, if I'm not going to blow this up as a 1 meter print, I'm happy to shoot it on this. It's kind of like sometimes I literally even have that thought process because the workflow associated with doing things through a larger camera system is 5 or 10 times the time. So if I'm not going to be doing an output beyond, a computer screen, then I have to actually justify why I need the time and effort to use the bigger system sometimes.
I guess now too, you could probably have a phone shot and then run it through like one of the AI image generators and say, this is the image, just make it bigger, and it'll regenerate the image for you in a larger resolution and higher quality, and give it all the feeling of a higher grade camera if necessary as well as part of that, and using that as the base. So that's another
still big differences in low light. Like I think even though people like Luke are pushing the boundaries of what's possible in low light with phones, that's probably the standout area for me of where there's still quite a marked difference in terms of the capabilities, because you're looking at a sensor that's this freaking big, it's tiny. But I think in bright light, like you can get some pretty clean files these days and very usable. And I think some of the Samsungs are up to like 200 megapixel files now, something ridiculous.
Yeah, the sensor is 200 megapixel sensor, but it's sort of crunching that down, and you can put it out as a 50 megapixel file, or even the standard resolution still is 12 megapixels, but there's actually 1200 megapixels on the sensor itself. It's just crunching it all down, or sort of what's the word? I just used it earlier in the show, but in downsizing it, downscaling it to that resolution, which actually drastically improves the image quality anyway. So I think if you had the 200 megapixel image, I mean, it's kind of pointless using that anyway. Like, who's going to be able to see that on the internet or on a phone anyway? You'd have to always be zooming in to see the detail in any case. So I think they just did the 200 meg to make it sound good, but I don't think they're actually outputting it at that anyway. So, but we've sort of run to near the end of the show, but I thought I'd ask you, Paul, what like maybe from a future perspective, where do you see in terms of the equipment or tech that you're using, maybe in the short term or midterm, what you might be integrating into your shooting workflow, or if you're just going to maybe continue as you are kind of scenario.
Well, I think in terms of like the fluidity, as I was just talking about before, the fluidity of the source of what I'm using to the output, I think is what I'm going to lean into, like learning how to integrate and make the most out of a phone file, a drone file, or a video, and my mirrorless systems, and find ways to integrate them across each other so I can create content that quite seamlessly leans into the different kind of tools that I use. I can see that sort of the next few years is probably one of my aims, because they all have quite specific purposes and places where they really, really suit best. And there's certain circumstances, like even professionally, like you pull out a phone versus, you pull out a big camera at a concert or somewhere where the shooter guard's going to come out and rip it out of your hand. But you've got 25,000 people standing there with iPhones shooting 4K 60p video, no problems at all. So it's kind of like there are even documentary circumstances where there's something unassuming, and the accessibility of access to content sometimes on a phone versus pulling out a big camera. And when you travel or go to sensitive areas or places, it's psychologically the door's wide open, whereas it closes in your face. So as a traveler and as a documentary sort of maker, and getting a little bit more into video as well, quite a lot more in the last few years, I see the video aspect in particular between phones and video and DSLRs and mirrorless cameras being a little bit more fluid. And I want to see how I can find ways to fine tune, the types of grading that I use, the shutter speeds that I'm using, the color calibration that I'm using, in a way that I can start formulating those things and lean into all the different storytelling sort of tools that I have with a lot more ease. That would be kind of my probably ultimate goal the next few years. So I'm with you, Lukey. I'm really pretty comfortable with the equipment that I've got. I think I'm going to start pushing this Mavic Pro a little bit harder and getting a sense of the cinematic qualities that are in this, are a little bit untapped. It was basically, I hadn't even seen anything about this when I got it. I'd never even seen any footage from it, because I literally got it the day it sort of came out on the Australian market. So being a little bit more on top of, what it allows me to do. And then I'm a little bit I'm more interested in probably some of the lens choices that would probably change my game a little bit more in the future, the near future, in terms of creating a different look and feel, and I think sometimes, Lukey, like when I watched your face light up with this new 135mm, it was like it gave you a new lease of life of new creativity. And I find that sometimes if you're getting a bit jaded or a little bit like I've used this forever, like you need a fresh boost, then sometimes a little bit of retail therapy can actually translate into a bit of creative therapy as well.
Yeah, well, it's not even, and it can be, you can see it like that just as a holistic thing, but it's also if I've got that lens in my bag and I'm at a location and I'm just feeling a bit over it, or I'm not connecting with it in some way, then I can put the 135 on and just shoot some detail shots with a beautifully soft background, like something completely different. And so that's why I used to really love using tilt shift lenses and things. You can experiment and play with these different pieces of equipment that might actually, they're for sale, by the way, if anyone wants a tilt shift lens, get in touch. But you can definitely it's a really lovely way to find another tier, or make a sideways step potentially, but a way of injecting something new and exciting and different and interesting, and ultimately probably something a little bit more creative in what you're trying to do. And who knows, that might also then lead into a space where that gives you a different style or a different point of difference, because that's something we're always looking for as photographers. It's very easy for all the images to start looking the same and all similar locations, everything's blending in together. And so by having different equipment, I'm a huge advocate believer in spending some money on some equipment if it can provide a point of difference, or do something, create something that people haven't seen before. And like a big example for myself was I invested in an A7S camera in 2015, I think it was, very early on. And at the time, that was the sort of game-changing low-light camera, and enabled me to create some astrophotography shots that were really quite eye-catching and really had a lot of detail and captured people's imaginations. And that really kicked off a whole night photography kind of scenario for myself from that. And so if there's one thing I could encourage people, is to think about these purchases as an ability to create a point of difference. And for me, my upcoming change or experimentation or is actually going multispectral, and not only just shooting in one sort of one bracket of light between 400 and 615 nanometers, like most of the visible light photography is. But I'm already doing a bit of infrared, but then playing with all sorts of different wavelengths, and being able to get some completely different looks and feels for places that these shots behind me that people have seen before, but you can visit a location and shoot it in a completely different way. You're not actually, it's not, is it reality or not? It is real. Like, it's still the same place. You're just seeing it in a way that you can't actually see it with your own eyes. And so for me, that's something really amazing and different, and enables another layer and another level of creativity in what you can do. Obviously, I'll still do the color stuff, all of the standard landscape images that I've always been doing, but being able to add another level of flexibility and interest in multispectral imaging will be really, really awesome. And I'm just got my full spectrum camera on the way back to me at the moment, so I'm very excited to see what I can do with that in Antarctica and Patagonia and different places like that. And so, yes, a new world awaits as it does with that. So, yes, definitely always think about, what can you do that can rejuvenate, create something different, something unique, that to separate your work from others is just a really great strategy, I think.
Well, the other aspect, just to finish on the show, is what's going to change it more than equipment, I think, is AI. I think that's going to have the biggest influence on our image making and storytelling, I think, in the next 5 or 10 years, than anything else that I'm aware of is in the pipeline. And even if you're not aware of it, there's a lot of AI in the cameras you're already using. All that eye tracking, all those kind of things are all based on the algorithms and.
Yeah, I'm not so worried about that. Like, I think there's useful AI, or there's AI that makes your job better, and then there's AI that
change things.
So, yeah, then there's the sort of image generation side of AI, I think, is the aspect that's going to be very interesting, particularly. And my opinion around that, and we did have an AI episode, is that whilst AI is going to definitely be disruptive, I feel like it's a really important thing to create authentic, original imagery that, AI can still create that too, but at the end of the day, I think people still want to have a connection with an artist. They want to have a connection with someone that's creating something, has a story to tell, an authentic story, something that actually happened in reality. And if anything, people are going to be wanting more stuff that's real, rather, having something that's authentic and something that they can actually see is tied to reality. And I don't know, maybe I'm being too optimistic about the whole thing, but I'd like to think that if you can stay true to what you're shooting, I'm personally not going to get into computational or generated AI at all, because that just muddies the waters way too much. I feel like it's a much bigger asset these days to just be able to create imagery that is authentic and does tell a story of the real natural world.
Yeah, but you and I are in a similar plane there, Lukey. But what I was sort of more referring to is, I think that the biggest technological changes in the equipment we're using is going to be how much AI is built into the programming of the cameras that we're using. And I think that's where those two are going to just cross bridge a little bit. So the cameras are going to be doing a lot of work for us, and they already are. And so I'm interested in, I can imagine that technologically, that's going to have quite an influence on the way cameras are built and the way they focus and how they track and deal with sort of certain lighting situations. There's going to be a lot more computation built into our actual equipment. which is a slightly separate conversation from
Yeah.
where the content comes
Yeah,
from.
hopefully there's nothing generative about it. It's all I guess it's there's a very grey line there in terms of how that all comes together. But I do see where you're coming from there in terms of much more from a the equipment itself and what can
Yeah,
be. And I think I've
absolutely.
seen a few adverts for different devices that can kind of tell you what which way to point and what how to be an artist so you don't have to think for yourself kind of scenarios. So I guess it might have a bit of that sort of stuff baked in. I don't know. But I don't know. I can't see it like, cameras had the ability to be like a phone, right? Like you could have apps in your camera, and for whatever reason they've decided not to make a camera like a phone, and it's a much more rigid, robust kind of device because of that. So I don't know how far that they're going to go down that, especially given that there's such a concern around AI and just at least the sort of generated imagery side of things already. But I guess Sony's already got the AI subject tracking and all of this kind of scenarios. So yeah, it would be interesting to see where it goes. And yeah, I sort of feel like at the end of the day, you can get swept up a bit too much in that, and it's just nice to be able to go out and take some pics and share them, and hopefully they're pretty enough to get people's attention.
Well, I had an email during the show, Lucky, and I'll bring it up right now because it's directly going to reflect on our next show. So, Mr. Tim Parkin is free and happy to do our next show live.
Wow, that's amazing.
So,
Wow.
if you didn't know already, we're really big advocates for the Nature Photographer of the Year competition, which is easily one of the premier visual competitions in the world, where nature in particular is kept as the hero, and they don't sort of allow AI or generative sort of stuff in there at all. And Tim's one of the founders of it, and Matt Payne as well, and Alex Nail. And every year we've kind of had either some or all of them on the show to celebrate. And we literally might have got a bit of a coup where
Yes.
we live get one of the originators of the show to go through the whole thing on the actual day that the final announcements are made.
It's probably with like I think we worked out the announcement the email I got was about 4 p.m. Australian time, and or AEDT probably then. So and our show's live at 7:30, so it might literally be hours after the announcement comes out. So we'll be seeing the shots
Off the press.
probably the first time everyone else has, but it's a really nice way to be able to step through the results and actually have like a commentary around that. So that's a very, very exciting show. So I
Yeah,
really
so
can't wait
it'd be
for it.
kind of a live on live sort of show, kind of like
Yeah.
show with the results almost being live as well. So that's a bit of a fluke in terms of that just happened to be our timing for the show. And I talked about the possibility. We thought, oh, Tim's going to be too busy. He's not going to do that. And he literally was,
Yeah.
yep, should be fine. Let's do it. And I was like, oh, okay.
Wow. Well, I hope
So
that they don't have a delay and get the results out after the show, but we'll have to worry about that when it comes, I suppose. So
otherwise, we'll be winging it, having an off-cuff conversation with Tim about all sorts of things. So
yeah, but all that's exciting. So that'll be the next show on what's that, the
okay.
15th of November. So definitely keep an eye out. The Natural Landscape Photography Awards is definitely, well, it's hard to say definitively, but one of the best nature based or manipulated imagery competitions that are going around. So it's I think Paul and I have had some dealings with it in the past, and I think we're both in the book last year and stuff. So it's obviously very close to us as well in terms of that. But we also believe very much in what the competition's trying to achieve, and very, very keen to see who's done well in it, and in any case just see some absolutely glorious imagery.
I told Tim checks in the mail.
There you go. Well, we've gone way over time, so we might have to leave it there. Feel free to
One last thing I forgot to say about the show. Ben and I are running our workshop on the Tarkine 17th to 21st of November, and we have one single spot free. If somebody wants to come join us, that's in the magnificent Tarkine, which I don't need to reiterate because we're huge advocates for that place in the show. I did go back look at something else. But, reach out to myself or Ben. That's either for a single or a couple, and it's a beautiful time here to head up there, and it's going to be a fantastic workshop. So
Yeah, it's an incredible place, and two of the best blokes you could ever imagine spending the time with, and incredible photographers. You only have to see the examples shots that they've taken on the website to see what's on the go, and pretty much all those shots were taken on those workshops, so it gives you a great idea of what's capable there. So yeah, definitely check that out if you've got some time to come down to Tassie. It's a brilliant time to be in the Tarkine. All right, thanks for joining us, everyone. Thanks for hearing us natter away. A bit of a different episode, this one, but it's a real joy to be able to talk about the tools of the trade, I suppose, and yeah, it would have been nice to have the Nikon aspect. So sorry if you do shoot Nikon and we weren't able to cover that off, or I guess Fuji or Olympus and Panasonic and the other brands. But yeah, thanks for letting us indulge, and hopefully you got something out of the show. Feel free to get in touch if you'd like to have any more info about anything we talked about. And yeah, otherwise we'll see you in a couple of weeks on the 15th at 7:30 and for a very big show. Really looking forward to that one. Take
Don't
care,
forget,
everybody, and have a good evening.